Just a second while it prepares to live stream. Great. All right, so back to the screen. So yes, as mentioned, our first speaker today is Victoria from Home Industries in Malawi, who has done quite a fair amount of exporting into the US. She's going to give us some real deep insight into her experience of it. So it's a practical example of things that you had to look out for. So I'll switch over to your slide now, Victoria, and we'll go from there. Awesome. Is that moving across for you, Victoria?
Yes, that's fine. That's great. Thank you very much, Rex. Thank you very much, everyone. And this is a very big opportunity for me and a privilege to actually be here and share with everyone else our experience with exporting and navigating the exports to actually get to the point where you can export to the United States. Homes Industries is an agro-processing company. We are based in Malawi, northern Malawi, in Karonga to be specific. We are in agriculture, working with a network of over 1,000 smallholder farmers. 70% of those are women. And so you can imagine the amount of work there is to actually get our produce or products in order and actually get ourselves to get to a space where we can actually close a deal to actually export to the United States. We are in rice, sunflower, groundnuts, green grams, and other products. Our main export to the United States is the rice and groundnuts. Most recently, we have a lot of inquiries on other products as well. And so it's quite overwhelming, but in a good way. So it's a good problem to have, because as an agro processor, as everyone else, all you're thinking about is getting those markets and getting bigger. And so for the longest of time, we have only been wishing as a small scale or as an SME, all you can dream of is to get beyond your borders. In 2015, when Homes Industries started, our plan was to never export until the domestic market was, food secure. But I think I was wrong, because then there were issues of cash flow and everything that came into play. And so we quickly started looking for markets or responding to markets that were outside Malawi. And so with that said, we kept improving on our game in order to access that market. And so if we go to the next slide, please. And so today I am very happy to be able to be on this platform to actually share very briefly on the things that we require to actually get there. And so very, very quickly, our presentation or my presentation is going to talk about what you actually need, how you can actually get there, what you need to know or what you need to do, what exactly and specifically your role is in this whole equation. How do you handle your payments, and then conclusions and recommendations, if you may, and see how best you can use this information to actually get to where you want to get. Next slide, please. So what you need to actually get to this point. First and foremost, you have your products. And so when you are getting to the point that you want to export, it definitely means that you have now done your bit and you are probably, you are already ready to actually export. So that means you need to find yourself a buyer. You cannot send your products to anyone. You cannot send your products outside if you don't have a specific buyer. So you definitely have to have someone that is going to actually make that purchase, someone you are sending those products to. And so if you are going to send, or if you are going to make that trade, you are actually going to be sending those products to someone. We call that someone a buyer. Once you establish that you have a buyer, and this is a legit buyer, because you may be aware the market right now is saturated with so many different people. Some are real buyers, some just want to con people, and some just want to do what they want to do. So this you have to ascertain, is this buyer real? How do you make sure that this buyer is real? Other than them having a good profile on their website and probably proof of transactions, you should be able to establish and check if they have a track record in that particular business. And then you can also use platforms like, now we have Catalyze, and like platforms. You can, if you're going to the United States, obviously, I want to believe that the USAID and their affiliates can help you determine if at all these buyers are real or not. And then I was pleasantly surprised when I shared some details about one of our buyers, and at a click of a button, information about them was made available. And I found that to be very, very helpful. So if you familiarize yourself with being online and the use of technology and stuff like that, that should be able to help you to actually ascertain and determine if this buyer is real or not. And then after you have determined the buyer's existence, the buyer's reality, you should be able to look at the documentation that's required. How do you manage to get that in order? If you are exporting to the United States, you should be able to understand the amount of documentation or the type of documentation that is required. In this case, there are issues of the export regulations that they have versus your domestic export, or import or export, in this case, export regulations. So they should be able to speak to each other, and they should be able to facilitate for a transaction that is going to be successful. You will need your phytosanitary documentation. You will need your export documentation. You will need all those things that include the tariffs and financial information about that particular product. You need documentation from organizations or departments like the agriculture department. In our case, we are dealing in agricultural products. So the agriculture department of the United States was very instrumental in making that possible. We have to find out if at all whatever we are importing or no, exporting to the United States is something that is legal, is something that is allowed, it is something, if it's something that's acceptable. Once you have done that, you should be able to understand the regulations that go or that surround that particular product. If you are sending rice, in our case, there's been rice and groundnuts that have been sent out. What regulations, what type of groundnuts are we talking about? What type of rice are we talking about? What are the product specifications that will enable, that will allow for that product to actually be accepted in that particular market? And so this includes, but not limited to, the moisture content. Make sure there are no contaminants in there. It has to be clean, and it has to be a product that is going to, your product claim on the pack or your product specification details should match whatever is the result after the product is tested in the United States. In our case, we had to send the batch sample or samples beforehand for them to be tested, for them to be actually in line with what we were claiming to be sending to them. And so this involves the agriculture department, it involves the different labs. In this case, we use the Eurofins. And so if that is in order, then you are actually in line, or you are a step closer to getting your product shipped across. You also need to understand your shipping your mode of transportation, your shipping and stuff like that. Because then without that information or those logistics is going to be a challenge. You may be aware Malawi is landlocked. And that means we do not have international ports. We rely on either Beira or the Dar es Salaam port, which is the one that we used because of the proximity, obviously. And so you need to have accurate information about that. You need to have accurate information because you need to understand the dynamics of being at sea. You need to understand the time frame that you're going to be at sea or that your product is going to be at sea. So in the absence of that information and details, you are unable to give accurate information to your buyer, which helps him determine what point he is taking that product to market. So all this information put together is going to help make concrete decisions about how that product then extends into the next or transitions into the next step, which is the market. The quality of your product, you need to have a good quality product. Otherwise, it will be rejected and you risk your cargo being returned at your expense, and that becomes a loss, especially when you're an SME like myself. Your packaging has to be ideal. Also, this is details that are shared by the regulations or the country into which you're exporting. In this case, the United States has got specific labeling instructions, specific packaging detail, specific packaging material that you are allowed to use. And so just make sure that it is the right packaging. And then you just have to understand the general market space. What is the demand of your product in that area? Much as you have a specific buyer, that is a first indication that the product is on demand. However, you need to understand how your product stands out, or how your product stands to whatever is already available on the market, especially when you're coming from a small space, so to speak, like Malawi, like the space that we are in. So our volumes have got to be able to match whatever that market absorbs. And you may agree with me that the United States market is a very large market. In that case, you should be able to understand the general aspects of the market in order to help you plan for those products and how they will keep going to that market and at what intervals, especially considering that the volumes that Malawi may produce or the volumes that Holmes Industries may produce, because it is a specific quality that is required, that needs to be information that you are aware of. Next slide, please. And so how do we get to that point? Like I said earlier, you need to research, get to know your market, get to know your product, understand your, so the research is not only about the United States, the research is about your product. Understand what your product is about, understand how you're going to manage a big market like the United States, given the fact that you are not in the biggest of production areas, but because you have understood your assignment on the market that you are serving and the particular product that you are servicing or supplying, you should be able then to plan on the volumes. You should be able to plan on the delivery points, as well as planning on the other, the packaging material and things like that. That will help you make sure that you have a smooth operation going on. Be clear about your want. What is it that you want? Is it a brand that you're pushing out? Am I pushing out Holmes Industries? Or is it just me being able to supply the best quality of product as we can? And then don't be shy to ask as much as you can. Oftentimes we are unable to achieve or get to what or where we want to be simply because we do not want to ask. But then the best thing that you can do is ask and ask and ask some more, because you are going to save on time. There are people that have made the mistakes that you're about to make. So why not save your time in just asking and getting the important information that comes with it. Understand, like I said again, understand the regulations that govern that particular trade. And I can't emphasize that enough. There are things that are changing every day. There's coding, there's packing, there is regulations around whatever it is that we are working in. Follow that, make it your assignment to understand every day. There is pricing, there's international pricing issues. When you understand those, then it can help you determine how you can actually have your pricing set in the most competitive way. Understand the specifications that are also involved. If we are saying this is long grain and it's organic and it is natural and it is this and that, you know, all those adjectives that precede the actual product, let us understand and make sure that they match what we deliver. Next slide, please. And so you have understood your assignment, you have understood your specifications and everything that comes with it. What's next? You should be able to get those authorities, in this case, Malawi, get to those authorities that are responsible for many other things. Get authorization in our case, because it's agricultural product, we needed to get a no objection letter from the Ministry of Agriculture. From there, you go to the Ministry of Trade and actually apply for the export permit. When you are going into all these places, you should have your documentation with you and it has to be clear. Your documentation will include, but not limited to, the expression of interest from your buyer that this is a transaction that you require to, you know, this is a transaction that you have agreed to get into. And so that helps the government to understand what is going on with whatever produce or whatever exports are getting out of the country. And they know how best they use that information. Get an export permit from the Ministry of Trade. For you to actually acquire that permit, you are also supposed to issue those supporting documents, the invoice, the specifications on the logistics, you know, and when exactly do you intend to get out, how much exactly are you pushing out, and stuff like that. And then, of course, you have to go through the Malawi Revenue Authority, where now they can actually share with you how best to manage your exports, how best to manage that transaction. In the absence of knowledge, and this is not to disrespect anyone, but in the absence of adequate knowledge, some authorities or some authorization officers will take advantage of that ignorance, and they might make you say pay for things you're not even supposed to pay for. So you should be able to get acquainted with those officers and understand prior or beforehand what is required of you and of them to enable this transaction to actually take place. And so you have to ensure that your logistics are sorted. You have to understand. So for Malawi, being a landlocked without ports, it means that we have to start discussing with the ports prior, like beforehand, and managing to actually schedule these, schedule the travel dates. When is the ship taking off? When is the estimated date of arrival? What is required, and so on and so forth. In our first or maiden export, we encountered some, some challenges where, in the absence or with the lack of experience in actually getting to ship goods and to other countries by sea, we got situations where after an invoice has been issued and paid and your goods have left, there is another invoice coming through. No, it doesn't work like that, and so I would urge anyone wanting to export to be able to understand all these dynamics to avoid all these complications that come into play. Imagine your goods are at sea and they're telling you that if you are not making this particular payment, or if you're not making this top up on the invoice, then your goods may not be offloaded and stuff like that. That is not supposed to happen. Fast forward, when we checked with the authorities on both sides, from the ports in the United States. In this case, we're dealing with the Baltimore port. And the other shipping lines, just to compare if this at all is acceptable or it happens, we then discovered that this was a very huge and unfortunate mishap. Next slide, please. And so your role in this case is that your paperwork has to be authentic and ready at all times. And then be sure that, and I said at the very beginning, that your buyer must be real and traceable, just like your goods should be, traceable. And then you have to agree on practical payment terms, because now there is an issue also of where people have sent goods to other countries, people have sent goods out there, but the payment issues become a complication and a problem. In the end, you find a good deal going very bad, and it is not profitable for the seller. And then quality assurance. We need to invest in our quality assurance. We need to invest in our quality, because without that quality, we do not have a market. So you may be aware that the quality requirements of the United States, just like it is for any other advanced or developed country, are very stringent, or they're very, very up there. It's important that that quality starts from you as the processor or as the supplier, to make sure that your products are not rejected on the basis of poor quality. In the case of Holmes Industries, our quality assurance or our quality standards start from the farm, because we are there to give the capacity building to the smallholder farmer, and then we monitor that process, the process of growing the various crops, up until the post-harvest handling capacity building, as well as the storage, which then determines, or which then gives confidence that we have control over the quality of products that we're going to actually use and put out there. And then make sure your role is that the goods are delivered in good time and the agreed time, unless it's out of your control. And of course, you have to track your shipment. Next slide, please. And so on the issue of payments, like I said, again, make sure that the terms are mutually beneficial. So should the pricing, because now you should be able to understand the exchange rates. You should be able to understand the implications of that transaction, or the implications of underpricing for when that is delivered. From Malawi, you have at least 3 months before the goods are actually delivered. In this case, our first shipment was in sometime in August, and then it was in Baltimore in November, on the 18th of November. And so you see that's quite a lengthy amount of time. By the time this is landed, by the time this is, what are the implications of that? So your exchange rates and your pricing and everything should be in accordance to that, so that the buyer wins, as well as you, the seller. You should be able to win and make profit on that, to allow for the next transaction. You have to agree on the currency that you are using. And then, of course, there's the issue of the Incoterms. Who is bearing the insurance? Is it FOB? Is it CFI? Stuff like that. Those are things that are supposed to be understood prior to the transaction taking place. The packaging material, like I said earlier, those specifications are supposed to be met. And this is something that it comes from the United States, in line with their regulations as far as packaging material for their goods, especially food commodities, are concerned. I learned over this that it's not just about taking your stuff and putting it in a container, no. And so even the containers are lined and everything, understand what fumigants, if at all they are allowed, and stuff like that. And so in conclusion, or what I would like to say is that exporting to the United States is a very fulfilling experience. It has been for us, despite the other challenges that my colleagues will cover as we go along. But it can also be a very complicated thing if we do not follow the rules and regulations. Otherwise, it is a simple and very enjoyable experience for anyone if the rules and regulations are followed. And I also recommend that if your buyer is a very busy person, you are able to engage an agent, and this should be done through, in this case, people can go through Catalyze to actually help them. And I'm sure this is something that will also be covered by my colleagues as we go along. And then, of course, choose the right logistics company to actually take your goods to the destination at the agreed time and everything. And quality control can never be overemphasized. This is something that will determine whether you stay in the business or not. And having said that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to more interaction and engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. That was great. We have had 2 questions which we'd like to try ask quickly. One was from Teresa saying, do you have a freight forwarder who handles all your logistics and export documents? I think you mentioned that you did. Who is that? Who's helped you with that?
Okay, so our freight forwarder and everything, they have been the Malawi Cargo Center. They are based in Tanzania. Currently, we have also engaged with the Mediterranean Shipping Company, who are also working on how best to help us, because now it looks like we will end up still using the port of Beira as well as the Tanzanian port. We have recently and are still in talks with DHL, because there are those small consignments that really cannot be containerized. And so DHL has got a package for SMEs, and they're trying to domesticate it and make it conform or make it work for the Malawian platform, for the Malawian SMEs, so that they can be able to use DHL and get their things in real time. So DHL really works for those bulk, but quantities that cannot be containerized, and especially for quantities that cannot be aggregated into one. You know how the 20-foot container can get 25 tons of the heavy stuff, but you are only shipping 10 tons, for example, and you have nothing else to match, or you have nothing else to fill that container with. That will be a waste of space. So DHL has come in with that kind of package to be able to accommodate smaller packages that cannot be containerized. So you can see that there's quite a range and a variety of those freight forwarders, but the primary one has been for us the Malawi Cargo Center.
Okay, brilliant.
I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that definitely does. And it also answers the other question from Gerson as well about consolidating products as well with someone like DHL. That's a great option as well. Thank you so much, Victoria. Our next speaker up today will be Rowan from King Cargo. Rowan is highly dedicated and motivated professional. He's got 17 years of experience in logistics. We have worked with Rowan on multiple products in the past, and always very persistent in making sure product gets to market on time. We just actually did a program with him to Singapore. We had about a week's notice, and he managed to get multiple products cleared over to Singapore in a week. So it's we always are relying on Rowan to make sure products are into market. Very, very resilient guy. So he's going to take it from here. I'll just stop this and then share. I'll let you share your slide, Rowan, and then you can control it from there.
Thank you, Dix. Just get this on.
Just while Rowan's doing that, yeah, thanks for everyone for putting questions on to the chat. Yeah, please don't be shy. Yeah, we will be taking questions at the end of each session. And then if there are anything that were missed out at the end that you think about, we'll do a very short Q&A at the end. Great. Thank you, Rowan. You can carry on.
Thank you, Rex. Thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Rowan. I'm from the company King Cargo. I'm the managing director. I started the company in 2019, been in the industry for 17 years. Very passionate about logistics. And I think my goal for the presentation would be to provide you with the insights and ideas that will help you navigate the complexities of logistics. But I think before we move on, I would just like to encourage you all to ask any questions or share comments in the meeting. Don't be shy. I welcome any feedback and questions. And I mean, we're all here to learn together. So please feel free to ask me if you have anything on your mind. But without further ado, I think let's start. Okay, so the different modes of transport. You obviously get the options for air freight and sea freight. Air freight would include the courier companies as well. Like Victoria said, DHL, get companies like FedEx, UPS, which is quite, they're basically in every country in the world. But that's for your smaller shipments, I would say. They can also assist you with bigger things, but the best would be for you to get a reliable freight forwarder to handle, I think, the bigger shipments, because it's always difficult for a freight forwarder like myself to compare by sending a small package to a country, because the courier companies, they dominate the market, let's say up to a weight of 50 kilograms. But after that, we quite in a good position to compete with the rates. So that's on the air freight. Then on the sea freight, you get two options. You get the FCL option, which is the full container load, which means that container, that would be your cargo in the container only. If you've got smaller shipments, obviously to send that in a full container makes no sense. So you've got an option for LCL, which is a less container load. It's a lot more cost effective, but knowing that you're going to share a container with a couple of other companies as well. I think the cost of freighting is quite important. Firstly, the general requirements to obtain shipping charges would be firstly to determine the packaging of your goods, number of pieces to be shipped, with you going to be all depending on what you'll be sending, but usually it's boxes, crates, pallets, which in which they shipped. And so in order to obtain a costing for that, the best would be to work out the number of pieces that you'll be shipping, the dimensions of each box and the weight of each box. That would make it a lot easier for us to calculate your shipping charges. Obviously on air freight, they go per kilogram. They work on either the actual weight or the volumetric weight, whichever is the greater. I sometimes use this as a typical example. You might send one big box of polystyrene. It only weighs 1 kilogram or 2, but if you look at the volumetric weight, what the airlines do is they take the length and the width and the height, and they divide it by 6,000, which gives you your volumetric weight. So just keep that in mind as well. I think which also makes it tough, which Victoria mentioned earlier, is the rate of exchange. This really plays a big factor as well. What makes it difficult is we might quote you on a shipment now based on the current rate of exchange, but you might only be sending your order 3 months from now. In 3 months, there could be a drastic change to the rate of exchange. If I have to compare to the rand and the dollar, we might quote you at the current rate of exchange of 18.2. But something happens, and by the time you need to ship your goods, the dollar's sitting at 20 rand to $1. So that also makes it quite challenging. And then also some of the issues we've had in the past is we get a lot of exporters that say they want a cost to ship their goods to the USA. So they want us to give them a rate per kilogram to send their goods. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. The USA is quite big. You've got stuff maybe going to the West Coast or the East Coast. It's all different. The air freight rates or the sea freight rates, it's different charges. So it's always difficult to determine that. So best would be to get a planned destination where you need to ship to, preferably an address as well, so that we can work out a accurate costing. On to the next slide. Very important is the Incoterms. I think this is where a lot of the sellers struggle, and they're not aware of the Incoterms. I think what Victoria mentioned as well earlier, just made a note of that, is that before the transaction apologies. Prior to the transaction taking place, best would be to include the Incoterms as well. So how the Incoterms works, you'll see on here, it goes from Ex Works up to delivery duty paid, which is quite common, which the exporters use, would either be FOB. So this means you are responsible to send the goods from your warehouse or your facility up to the port. So that will include your packaging, your transport charges, the loading into the container port charges, all of that. But then once it gets loaded onto the ship, on the ship or the vessel, this is where it becomes the responsibility of the buyer for those charges. So FOB is quite common, but there's also CIF, which is the same as I explained, but you are liable for the shipping charges up to the agreed port. So you need to include the ocean freight charges, or even the air freight charges up to the airport. And once it arrives there, then the responsibility lies with the buyer to cover those costs. I think my advice to you would be that to try and avoid a DAP term or even DPU term, because this obviously comes down to a lot of cost, because you need to ship the goods from your facility or warehouse up to the buyer's premises. So this is not something we see often. Like I said, it's usually they agree to a FOB term or a CIF term. Documentation required before export. These are just a few basic documents which I've listed. It all comes down to what you'll be sending as well. If it varies from product to product, but definitely something that you're going to have to need would be the commercial invoice and the packing list, which I'll go through now. It might be that they would require a certificate of origin, depending on the product, a certification testing, certificate of analysis, safety data sheet, and if you have any food or plant items, health certificates. So this is a typical example of a commercial invoice. Just put a layout here where you've got your invoice number. Obviously, some of you have got your own templates or systems in place which you use, but the details that are listed here, we find is often requested for. You might have your own format, but they might ask for these additional requirements as well, especially customs. So this would be just a template which you can put on your letterhead with all your details. You need your invoice number, your date, shipper would be yourself, and then obviously the address. So the address, what we've come across as well is that there's often issues if you list or state a PO box number. They need a physical address from you, the telephone number or contact person, exporter's code and VAT number. That's fairly optional, but it at times it is definitely required. Then on the right, you've got your consignee details, the address, telephone number, contact, customer PO number. We've seen a lot of delays where the clients send the invoice over to the consignee or the buyer, where they haven't got the purchase order number listed on there, which obviously delays payment. For customs purposes, they will require the country of origin as well as the final destination, where the Incoterms that I just spoke to you guys about now, it'll be good if that's mentioned on there. And obviously your terms of payment and your shipping method, whether it's going to be air freight or sea freight. You can add your case number, a very detailed description of the goods, which is very important. Let's say you'll be exporting tea as an example. You can't just put a one-liner in with tea. If you've got different sizes of boxes with different quantities, you need to list, let's say, 10, case number 1 to 10 with 20 boxes of tea per case, with the amount of tea bags inside. International harmonized code, that's very important, but we'll get to that now. The quantity and the unit value needs to add up to the total value. So that is the basic commercial invoice. Packing list, more or less the same format, but a bit more detail about the packaging of the goods. You've also got your packing list number, your date, and then important is to include your commercial invoice number to which the packing list is referred to. The consignee details, address, telephone number, and then your case numbers. So here, what it's important to, you can't put on as an example, a 20-foot container and say container full of, let's say, cosmetics. If you need to list, if you've got your goods, your order packed into 20 boxes and there's different products, you need to list box 1 of 10, the length of the box, the width, the height, which will give you the cubic meters. So there you take your length, your width, and your height in meters. You times those together, and that will give you your cubic meter. The gross weight would be the weight of the products inside the box, and your net weight would be the products on its own, excluding the box weight. If you're sending any goods that might require serial numbers, there's a column in there for that as well. And then your clear description, which needs to be the same as what you had. It needs to correspond with the invoice. The harmonized code, like I said, we'll get to that now, which is also very important. The certificate of origin, it's not required all the time, but this is something you need to discuss with your buyer or the consignee to see if this is a requirement on their side to have the goods imported. Shipper, that would need to correspond with your commercial invoice. Consignee, same there, it would need to correspond. The intermediate address or notified party, that could be the consignee's freight forwarding company. So they'll receive a pre-alert from the shipping line or the airline once the goods arrive. So it's important that those details would be the same. The pre-carriage by the place of receipt, where the goods will the final destination of the goods. Exporting carrier, if it's going to be sea freight or air freight. Port of loading and the foreign port of unloading. If you've got details, flight details, so the carrier details as well as the flight number, or if you're sending by sea freight, the name of the ship or the vessel and the voyage number, it's important to list that on there as well. Then your forwarding agent will be the shipping the goods from this side. Let's say for argument's sake, it would be us. Our details would need to be put in there as well. There's the booking shipment number, the top right-hand side, which is in the sea freight. They'll give you a booking number, but it won't be the same as your bill of lading number. So with the airway bill, if you're sending by air freight, it's most likely that the airway bill number and the booking number would be the same. The domestic routing, how you'll be sending the goods. If, let's say, you're sending goods to Los Angeles and you'll be shipping via Singapore, you need to state the routing of the vessel, and then your transportation method. Then once you've received your container, if it's by sea freight, you need to list your container number on there. The shipping line will provide you with a seal number. The number of packages, like I said in the packing list, if you've got 10 boxes to send, you list 10 boxes on there, and the description of the commodities need to correspond with the invoice. We've noticed that we've had some exporters that they've got the products on there, but the description is not as clear as it is on the invoice, and then this would be rejected. Your gross weights, very important as well, and your measurements, your cubic meters. all of these need to correspond with the invoice and the packing list. If the goods arrive at destination and there's any difference in the gross weights, then they'll reject your certificate of origin, which means you have to issue a new one, courier it over to them, which is going to take a couple of days. And you might end up paying port charges, storage charges. So locally in South Africa, a certificate of origin, we obtained that from our Chamber of Commerce. So there's a couple of Chamber of Commerce in mostly your smaller towns, but a few in your major cities. It would be up to you to check which Chamber of Commerce is in your area. They'll also give you a template. I'll suggest not to use this exact template. It varies from country to country, and also from Chamber of Commerce. There's different templates that need to be used. But you complete this document, you sign at the bottom, and then it's a commissioner of oath, which would then check your invoice. You need to attach your invoice to your certificate of origin. They might have a couple of questions to ask. They might ask for additional documentation. But if they're happy with what they've seen and what you've provided, then they will sign and stamp your certificate of origin. Okay, certification testing. This again comes down to what you have available in your countries. A lot of the call it the standards. Over here in South Africa, we have Intertech, we've got SGS, and we've got the Bureau as well. So these are multinational companies that provide testing, inspection, certification, and also quality assurance services for various industries and products. Certification test of goods is a process of inspection, testing, and verification to ensure that the goods meet certain quality, safety, and standards. So there's a few options that we have, but SGS and the Bureau is quite common in the other African countries. You might get one not too far from where you are, and they'll be able to assist you through the process and also give you a lot of advice on the requirements that the US authorities might require. I think, again, important is to, prior to doing these testings, is to check with the consignee or the buyer, and also the freight forwarder who's receiving the goods, or the customs broker, just to confirm that these would be acceptable. And if not, the US would need to give you the requirement of an agency like one of these three that you need to contact for testing. Okay, certificate of analysis. Like I said, this doesn't apply to all the products. This is a typical example of cosmetics or beauty product. A certificate of analysis which would be required for import. Again, sending this prior to the shipment to have the consignee check or your agent check that these would be sufficient and will be accepted by the local authorities in the US. I see Adrian and Lorraine, they on the call as well. They're quite familiar with that. If we export for them, these are often required, and it's good to have these on hand, and also to see that they're not outdated, because there's a specific could be an expiry date or a date of completion which you need to have on there. So these mainly comes down to cosmetics or beauty products. Safety data sheet. This is important as well because there might be the airlines often require this. It's fairly common for the import of food items, beverages, chemicals, cosmetics, beauty products, just to name a few. But the data sheet specifies that a product or service meets certain quality, safety or standard, and is often required for import or the export of goods. So data sheet is broken down into 15 sections. What I want to concentrate on is the section 14, which would be your transport information. With this client specifically, there's no, the cosmetics aren't considered toxic or dangerous goods or flammable. If you do have, if you are sending anything that might be toxic or flammable, it will be the laboratory that assists with the manufacturing. They will put the full details onto the safety data sheet, and then it also comes to the transport information. Under the transport information, depending on the product, they might require special packaging, special labeling, or there's only a certain amount or quantity that you'll be able to ship at a time. Also comes down to the boxes, how many of these products are allowed per box, but this goes over to your special dangerous goods packages or packaging companies who also issue a declaration to say that they've packed the goods are on order, it's been labeled, it's been checked. So these are quite often required as well. As an example, I see Philip is on the call as well. Here with this, these are issued by our local agriculture department to approve the export. We've never had a case where we export tea where they do not require a phytosanitary certificate. Even if you'll be sending seeds or raw nuts, phytosanitary would be required for that. So it basically comes down to what someone explained to me the other day, is that anything that comes from a plant or tree, which is not processed, would require a phytosanitary certificate. If you've got coffee beans, but these go through a process where it's granules or even your spices, then a phytosanitary certificate is not required. With the food items, we've also got the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries. They issue a health certificate. Again, best would be to check with your consignee the buyer to see that this is a requirement, but 99% of the time this would be a requirement from them. Without these certificates, if you will be sending the goods to the destination, without these certificates, they won't allow the import. They would either place this in storage until you supply the correct documentation, and only after that would they proceed with the import. The FDA, so this is the Food and Drug Administration. Also quite a process to go through, but once you've got the process, then and you're registered with that, it makes life a bit easier. I put a website link in here for the Registrar Corp, who can assist you with these. But I think before you can register your facility and products in the FTA Unified Registration Listing, it's necessary to create an FTA account. Once you have created the account, you can access the appropriate registration modules and provide the required information. Again, you cannot send your goods if you haven't got your FTA registration in place. And if once you have registered, there's a certain process that you need to go through as well when sending goods, by notifying them of what you'll be sending, when you'll be sending it, as these are regulated by the FTA. Some products might require samples to be sent for testing prior to the importation. So if you have a shipment planned, best would be to see if they require samples first for testing before you'll be sending your shipment to the US. Like Victoria mentioned earlier, if it all comes down to quality control as well, if you're going to be sending shipment of which the quality is not good, you might stand the risk that they might return the shipment back to origin. So, as I referred to in the commercial invoice and packing list, there's a harmonized or HS codes, harmonized system codes. It's got different, what they call chapters or headings. So everything that's imported fall under one of these categories. If you have a HS code, which you can either obtain yourself or from your freight forwarder, this HS code would specify the specific product. And that specific product is linked to a certain duty amount or special duties, which is payable. I think what clients usually, they've got they're under the impression it's just easy to send the goods, but not aware of the duties if it's applicable to your shipment. For instance, if you'll be sending textiles in South Africa, the import percentage, the duty percentage on that is anything between 25 and 45%. So if you're not aware of that from the start, then and your shipment arrives there, depending on your terms as well. But let's say you're on DAP terms, then you're liable for the import duties. There's also import VAT, which is payable. This import VAT can be claimed back by the buyer as well, but this from the revenue authority. But again, depending on the product as well. So for go back to this now. Your import duties and taxes. So it all depends on the AGOA requirements as well. The purpose of AGOA is either to send your goods duty-free or at less duties. And the responsible party for settling the import duties and taxes depends on your agreed Incoterms once again. Furthermore, the compliance with AGOA requirements also plays a role to determine the responsibility or the responsible party. But this is something you would need to ensure you understand before finalizing your transaction. Okay, planning the freighting of your goods. As I mentioned earlier, you've got air freight or sea freight, which comes down to the cost, the accepted dimensions of the airlines, loading plan, transfer time, routings, and packaging, which is what is very important. I think let's start with the cost, is to understand or to obtain your quotes prior to you sending the products. If you're exporting by air freight, it's important to consider the size and dimensions of the packages being shipped. Your freight forwarder will need to check the limits of the airline's cargo or the aircrafts. If you're planning to send some goods and you've got limited flights with smaller aircrafts, you might end up with a big problem because it won't be able to fit into the aircraft. So that would be important to check as well. In Johannesburg, we haven't got a serious issue with that because we've got weekly flights with and also you've got your airlines, your normal airlines that also have cargo planes coming to collect. So we don't have a serious issue with that. But if you're sending something to a destination which is not as easy to access, you might end up getting the goods to the nearest airport, but your connecting flight would then be the issue because it might be a smaller aircraft and therefore they might have to go over to road freight, and of course that increases the cost as well. Your loading plan, I put the specification sheet in here. This gives you the type of containers you get, the inside length, the door width. Obviously, you just get the 20-foot and the 40-foot containers, but we've seen height often being an issue. We book a container. The client has the dimensions of the machine until they load that machine into a crate, then obviously pieces, and you end up with a container at your premises with a crate that cannot fit into that container. So I think that's very important just to check. Then the transit time. This would be determined by your freight forwarder when he consults the airlines or the shipping lines, whichever method you use to be sending your goods. They often, what we've seen is that our competitors often quote a client and usually the client doesn't understand that how is it possible that we charge more and this company can do it for a lot less. And you go through your quotes and you make a couple of calls and contact different shipping lines or airlines, and you can't find that solution necessarily, but your competitor might have a better option, but what they don't say to the client at the time of quoting is that the transit time might be 50, 60, even 90 days at times, because there's 2 or 3 different transshipment ports. So as an example, it might go from here to Singapore, from Singapore to Europe, then it gets loaded over to a vessel to Baltimore, and then from Baltimore in the US, it's rerouted to or transshipped to the final destination port. So very important with the transit time. Best would be to obtain a sailing schedule from your freight forwarder as well. When he quotes you, it's got all the details on there. If there's weekly sailings, you get your vessels listed a month or 2 in advance. It's got the voyage number, the estimated date of departure from the port, and the estimated time of arrival or date of arrival at destination. I think this is very important because we've seen a lot of issues in the past, especially with the routings, like I said, that these are the shipping routes the goods will need to follow. Also, the big issue would be the transshipment ports. So they give you a transshipment time of, let's say, 30 days, but it takes this vessel 21 days to get to the certain port. And then from that port to the final destination might be another 7 days, but the vessel might arrive late, so you miss your transshipment vessel, which means you lose another week. Some of the transshipment vessels only transship to the certain destination every fortnight. So you might end up with your container sitting in the weeks. So very important. Then your packaging as well. I think packaging, it depends on the product that you'll be sending, but this is it's part of my next slide. We've noticed that there's a lot of companies that try and save on packaging. I know all of us are on a budget, but it is important to get the best suitable packaging for your product. If you've got fragile shipments or shipments that's quite heavy, best would be to ensure that you've got the correct packaging for that. Because it goes loaded by a forklift at your warehouse or your premises. It goes into a truck. This truck is in transit. It goes to the port. At the port, it's on board a vessel. Again, then unloaded from the container. It might be loaded onto another truck to get to the delivery point. So your packaging, different processes and handling that you want to avoid damages, and you want to avoid your buyer or your customer not being happy once the goods arrived and it's not in what type of packaging would be suitable for air freight. I think it's important to use preferably a cardboard which is light and strong. As I mentioned earlier, on your air freight charges, you pay per kilogram. So you don't want to make use of a heavy crate or a pallet if it's not necessary. Also, instead of sending loose boxes, best would be to have these palletized, wrapped, and then strapped down to the pallet to avoid any damages to that. On the sea freight side, often the goods are crated. You've got the option of putting these either on pallets or just to add to the air freight as well. Plastic pallets is also a good option. It's lighter. You get some of the plastic pallets which is fairly strong, and that would last during the transit. But just to get back to the sea freight, 90% of the times we'll get crates, which would be manufactured for the products. It's strong. It's sea freight. So on sea freight, you pay per cubic meter. If you're sending by LCL, which is a less container load, and then if it's you're looking at saving costs, which is often option is a slated crate in the bottom right hand corner, which saves a bit of cost, still safe, and it can withstand any hard handling of your goods. But again, if you're sending heavy machinery or heavy products, best would be to get a suitable and a strong crate for that, instead of trying to save, and you might end up with your product being damaged once it gets to the destination. Labeling, like Victoria said earlier, there's certain requirements from the US, depending on the product, what exactly needs to be on the label of your box. I've listed a couple of common points which is required, such as the shipper, the full name of the shipper, the consignee, full details, address, telephone numbers. Then your weight of your box is important, the dimensions. Obviously, if you'll be sending more than one package, to list them as 1 of 5, 2 of 5, 3 of 5, as an example. Without the labeling being on the product, we've seen some instances in the past where it goes to an airport, to the warehouse. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of boxes in there, and if your box hasn't got a label on there, or it might have come off during transit, then obviously these guys have no idea who it's for, and you might end up either losing your box, or having them take some time to determine which box is yours if it is found. Special labeling, very important as well. So you want to include your fragile label on there for your product. If it's temperature controlled, I would suggest putting a label on there as well with the required temperature. And then the tilt watch, which is quite amusing. You don't really it's difficult to get that, but we see it a lot with import shipments where this is placed onto a box. So if that box is tilted at a certain point, you'll have your little ball in there run over into the next one, which gives you the angle at which the box has been tipped at. So this is good if there's a case that your box might fall over during transit, whether it's on the ship or the airplane or the truck, then immediately this can be seen on the shock watch as well. And with you accepting the delivery of the goods, with the shock watch on there, you can make a note to say that this is as you received it, and chances are that the box might have fallen over as well. So it's not necessary to get that, but it is a very good and safe option. But as for the fragile labels and the temperature controlled labels, it's not a requirement, but it is definitely a must to put that on there, to avoid any issues or any food items that might go off during transit if it's not placed into the correct refrigerated facility. Fumigation. Yeah, fumigation is also one of the important points. With the fumigation certificate, it's a official document that validates that all boxes or shipping containers have been chemically disinfected. And then during export, products are usually stored in wooden boxes that must be fumigated before transit to avoid the risk of pest infestation. So there's a lot of companies that do this. I don't think it's an issue that you might struggle to find them, but very, very important. If you'll be sending wooden pallets or wooden crates, ensure that it's been fumigated to avoid any penalties or any delays which would end up in you having to pay storage costs, seeing that your goods would now need to be fumigated on arrival at destination, and that's also additional cost that you want to avoid. Just the basic stamp that they put on there. So you've got your country code. In this case, it was Poland. Your IPPC logo, which is on there, and the type of treatment that was. Apologies. The type of treatment that was used. Okay, then with your sea freight, once you've booked your container, you've got your shipping ready, your freight forwarder has booked your container, it gets delivered to your warehouse or your facility, the container gets loaded, and it's off to the port. Your freight forwarder would be, you would need to prepare the bill of lading for the shipping line. Now, this is also crucial because your other documentation, such as your commercial invoice, your packing list, your certificate of origin, it's important that the shipper and the consignee again needs to correspond with that. It would avoid any delays upon import, and this is something you need to get right from the start. If this document is completed, best would be to send a draft to the consignee or the buyer, who would then pass this on to their freight forwarding company or the customs broker who's going to handle the import at destination. They would usually be added to the notified party box number 3 here, with the exact details, the contact details. So once the goods arrive at the port at destination, then the freight agent or freight forwarder would be informed of that. There's your port of loading, port of discharge, pre-carriage, if there's any transshipments, your vessel name, your booking number, forwarding agent, which would be your freight forwarder. And like I said, in the notified party, this would be the consignee's freight forwarder, and of course your final destination. Under the marks and numbers, that would be your container number, your seal number, which is on there, the quantity of goods. Like I mentioned earlier, if you'll be sending 10 boxes or 10 pallets, you have to state there that it's a quantity of 10, and it would be either pallets or crates or boxes under the kind of packages. Under the description of goods, important again is to have this correspond with your invoice and your packing list, that it's a clear description of what you'll be sending. Under this, the description of the goods, you can also add your invoice number or any additional detail on there, which refers to your commercial invoice or packing list. Again, your weights as well be the same, and your cubic meters, very important that everything corresponds. Now, with a bill of lading, there's a bit of a safety net with that. You've got two options when you issue a bill of lading, or your freight forwarder issues the bill of lading, or instructs the shipping line to issue the bill of lading rather. The shipping line gives you an option of either having a express bill of lading issued, or they call it a telex release as well. So this means that you won't require, or the consignee won't require a original set of bills of lading once it arrives at destination. They'll be able to clear on a copy. If this is a scenario where you are sending on terms CIF or CFR, and you require your payment from the buyer prior to the vessel arriving, the second option is to have a original set of bills of lading issued. Usually comes in 3 originals and 7 copies. Very important is that the original copy of the bill of lading, this would mean that without the original copy, the consignee's freight forwarder or customs broker at destination would not be able to have the goods cleared without that original bill of lading. If it's a case where you have a original set issued by your local shipping line, and you've got those copies on hand and you have received your payment, then you would need to send these by courier to the consignee to ensure that it gets there before the vessel arrival. But if it's a case where the client or the buyer has not paid you as yet, then this is the safety net that I refer to. You've got the option of holding back your original set until you receive full payment. What you can also do is to avoid the couple of days it might take to have the original set of bills of lading sent to destination. You can hand the original set in at the local office where it was issued, and they will then notify the destination port that they've obtained the original set back from you. It must be all 3 copies, because it might be a case that 1 copy goes missing, and with that 1 copy going missing, someone else might be able to receive your shipment once it gets to destination. So best would be to hand the 3 copies in at the shipping line, and they will notify the shipping line at destination that they may release the shipment. Also on the freight, you would need to with your freight forwarder as well, you would need to stipulate if it's going to be freight prepaid or freight collect. If you've got terms FOB where you need to deliver to the port, then these charges would be freight collect. If it's a matter of CIF or CFR Incoterms, then you would be liable for the freight charges. So on the bill of lading, it would specify freight prepaid. I think that's it for the bill of lading. On the air freight side, the airway bill, which is fairly similar to the bill of lading. You've got your shipper, your consignee, the issuing carrier's agent, also the airport of departure, your flight number, your flight dates, the terms of payment for the freight charges, whether it's going to be prepaid or collect, your number of pieces that's specified on this. This is a document which your freight forwarders issue with the corresponding weight again. The chargeable weight, that would be whichever is the greater, the actual weight or the volumetric weight, and then your rate and your total of freight charges that has been paid. There you put your description, and I think it's important. It's such a small block to fill in a complete description. If you've got an invoice with a lot of lines in there, best would be to just give a brief description and state that it can be referred to this specific invoice number. So this is the airway bill. Yeah, then just important points prior to sending your goods. I think it's of utmost importance to get your Incoterms right from the start. To get the requirements from the consignee or the buyer, the customs broker or the clearing agent, freight forwarder, to state exactly the requirements prior to sending your goods. Also to the compliance of the products, whether there's testing reports required, quality control, your phyto, your health certificates, if that's a requirement. It's very important just to have all the information available before you finalize your transaction. Deadlines. Your deadlines also a difficult one. Why I'm saying that is you've got you might have a deadline in your contract, which you need to adhere to, and you obtain a sailing schedule from your freight forwarder, and you see that the transit time is a certain amount of time, and you should be able to get it delivered or discharged at the port of destination before the deadline as specified in your contract. Now, with sea freight, it does get difficult at times. Obviously, the vessels depends on the weather as well. If they've got rough seas, you might end up losing a day, 2, maybe 3. But also, again, it's important to know that your ports might be windbound as well. We've had a case well, not a case, but often it happens in Cape Town, which is in Port Elizabeth, the Windy City, where they stopped the operations in the port, seeing that the port is windbound. So it means the gantries that load the containers, they cannot, with the rough winds, be able to load the containers onto that ship. So as big as that ship or that vessel is, it's difficult for them to load and unload the containers. And it's as simple as having them declare the port is windbound, and that vessel might sit there for a day, 2, maybe even 3 days, if not longer. And this comes down to your deadline, because you might have shipped the goods in time, and according to your sailing schedule, you would have, or the vessel would have arrived at destination in time. But things like the port being windbound or weather delays at sea, that's not something you can foresee or control. So it's important that you, this is what I tell our clients, is rather add a couple of days or a week, whatever is the best possible option, just if there is any delays, that you've still got a couple of days to work with. Like I mentioned earlier, the transshipment ports as well, according to the schedule, this container might arrive in this port today and be loaded onto another vessel in 2 days' time. But now the first vessel might be delayed by a couple of days, so it misses the transshipment vessel, and you end up having your goods delivered a week or 2 later, which is not ideal. What products can be exported to the USA under the AGOA trade agreement? Again, it comes down to what type of products you'll be sending. If you adhere to the requirements, the regulations, the quality control of the products, but these are just the main points that I wanted to mention. Apparel and clothing accessories, and your footwear. It's important to put the country of origin where the goods were manufactured either onto the label or onto the packaging of the goods. Same for textiles. For instance, in South Africa, if we import any clothing and there's not a country of manufacture or made in whichever country on a tag or one of the labels on that clothing accessory, then it gets rejected by customs. So we've had a case like this last year where we received goods at the airport. There was no clear markings on there. It wasn't in English. There's no country of manufacture, and these are requirements. I would say if it's like this in our part of the world, in South Africa, the USA might even be more strict with that. So customs either gave us the option to return the goods to origin or have them destroy the goods. So yeah, this is for clothing, footwear, apparel, and textiles. Agricultural products, like I said, coffee, tea, spices, and cut flowers. Phytosanitary certificate would definitely be required for that. I think over the years things have started to, with technology, become a bit more easier, where you can apply for these products online, or you've got an online portal where you apply for your certificate. Where in the past you had to go into an office, complete a set of documents, and you'll find yourself driving up and down there until you get your certificate. But nowadays, with the technology, it makes things much easier. Same with processed foods, canned fruits and vegetables, fruit juices and nuts. Health certificates will be required for this. I think what is also important is the labeling of your products. This needs to be in English, obviously, where it's been manufactured, the ingredients of the products. If you've got any canned fruits, it needs to stipulate exactly the ingredients in that can. If I can mention another example that we had is we had a import shipment for a overseas client or exhibitor who wanted to attend a local show here. They manufacture energy drinks, and they export to most parts of the world without any issues. However, the shipment that they sent to South Africa, it hasn't got a high caffeine content label on the can. And then also it needs to be in the font needs to be a certain size, which is a requirement by the South African authorities. And this shipment was rejected, and we had to return it to origin. Chemicals and pharmaceuticals, just to add to that, definitely an FDA requirement, and obviously the agricultural products as well as the processed foods, that is definitely a FDA requirement. So you need to ensure that you've got all your FDA documents in place to avoid any issues. Minerals and metals such as gold, diamonds, also a tricky one. There's a lot of certification which is required. It differs from product to product, but the consignee or the freight forwarder or the customs broker would need to advise what import documentation would be required in the US to import these. Handcrafts and artwork, same with this. It comes down to the what type of product it is, what it's made of, what is the process it goes through, which is important to specify as well prior to the export of the goods. Leather and leather products, for instance, wallets, bags, skins. We've CITES, a non-CITES certificate might be required for that. So with the CITES certificate, it states that which leather or which animal the leather product comes from. There's obviously in indigenous animals, and your local Department of Agriculture or the authorities, they would need to issue a certificate or a statement to specify that these are the products you'll be exporting, and you've adhered to the rules and the process of the manufacturing. And after that, you'll be able to export the goods. Again, important to check with the consignee whether these certificates would be required. Vehicles and vehicle parts, that's also one of the the goods that can be exported. Also, a lot of rules on that. Not any vehicle or vehicle parts can be exported. It depends if the vehicle was manufactured in that specific country, what parts were required, or what parts were imported from which country in order to import it into the US. So it depends on with all the products, what type of product it is, and the process it went through to manufacture. Yeah, and that's all from my side. I think there's a lot of things to cover, but I think I've mentioned most of them. Please feel free to ask any questions. I'm going to leave my details here, which you can take down as well. If you've got any questions or advice, please don't hesitate to contact me. And thank you, Catalyze, for the opportunity, and Victoria as well for your help. I was in contact with Victoria prior to the presentation, just to get a feel on her experience and what it was like for her to have her goods exported to the USA. But I wish you guys all the best with any future opportunities to export to the US. And like I said, if you've got any questions, please let me know. And I'm sure we'll have some questions and answers which we'll attend to as well.
Great. Thank you so much. That's great. We do actually have a few questions. One has come up on the chat saying, is fumigation mandatory? Because they have organic certified products and are obviously wanting to rather focus on that. And they don't want their products to get affected by fumigation.
Yeah, it comes down to what type of packaging you'll be using. If it's going to be wooden crates or wooden pallets, then definitely being fumigated. Also, best to just check if it's a requirement, but I know for the USA, it's definitely one of those. But for your product itself, it depends on what it is, but it doesn't need to be fumigated. However, if you are sending any products that are made of any raw wood materials, then you'll need to have proof of fumigation of the product.
Okay, great. So yeah, depending on what you are sending your product on and in is key there. Great. And then someone has asked, they have hazardous samples that they're trying to get across into a market. Haven't said what hazardous samples. Do you have any recommendations for cost-effective shipping to or sending freighting over to the market?
Yeah, Alex, I think again, depending what you'll be sending, that's important. If it might require special packaging, which also increases your cost. And then some of the airlines and shipping lines have a hazardous surcharge as well, which they charge for that. But yeah, for any advice on that, I would suggest that they can definitely contact me. Let's have a look at what it is. Seeing that it's hazardous, it's going to require a safety data sheet, which they should have in place. So this would have the transport requirements on there as per the data sheet.
Okay, yeah. So Mary has actually just said that it is an essential oil that's sort of classified as a dangerous good. So there's a lot of surcharges on delivery. But I think, Mary, the key is contact Ruan, give her the details and struggles that you're having, and he will try to find a solution for that. He always does come up with various options with his partners around the world to make that happen. And then just a long shot, Ruan. Someone has asked, they're trying to courier samples from Nigeria to the US. Any chance you've got any connections there, or advice on how to get that, assist with that?
Yeah, if it's going to be samples, I assume it would be a small shipment. Again, if they're looking at a cost-effective way, definitely courier would be the best option for that. And I think usually the issue with the couriers, they're very easy. It's very easy for them to collect the shipment. You might book it now, they'll pick it up in the next hour and have the goods sent. But once it gets to destination, then it gets stuck. And then DHL or the courier companies, they don't really have the knowledge of that specific requirement. So the goods might get there, but now they're asking for a health certificate or a phyto certificate. So best option would be to check with the consignee or the buyer on the other side, or your reliable freight forwarder to give you some advice on that.
Awesome, great, thanks. And yeah, again, you can contact Ruan if he'll be able to help you with that. We've also got a question here, but not for you, Ruan. Does AGOA assist with finding markets in the US? Just to clarify that AGOA is a free trade agreement. It isn't a project or program to find you business in a market. It's there to support you and make it sort of more attractive to buy products from Africa from the US. So, however, Khulukaya, please get in contact with Cindy. There are various programs that we're running in that. But again, Ruan, thank you very much. We will share your details with people to get in contact with you as well if they are wanting to ship something around the world. But yes, again, you can also have a chat to Catalyze. We are working closely with Ruan on this project throughout the year to support people with trade queries and issues like that. Next up, we have Eckhard from Trelec. I'm sharing the wrong stuff here. And he will be giving us some insight on AGOA. Thanks for joining us, Eckhard. So Eckhard comes from a company that writes the book on what's happening with AGOA. He's updating that all the time. They've got a website called agoa.info that's been going for the last close to 20 years, or if not more, and it's constantly updated. So he's really maybe could call him the godfather of AGOA now. Probably shout at me for saying that, but yeah, got loads of information on that. So yeah, Eckhard, you can take it away and go for it and share your slides.
Thank you very much, Rex. Is my audio coming through?
It is. You sound good.
I'll be sharing my screen just now, just running the PowerPoint of my side, so you don't need to do that. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, first of all, Rex, for the introduction. Yeah, you're always passionate and driving, and yeah, just a fantastic person to work with. So well done on organizing this workshop. It's been extremely interesting so far. Obviously, as you alluded to, I kind of see more the one side of AGOA, and listening to the other esteemed speakers just now, the more practical side and the logistical side, I find extremely interesting. Nice to have someone from Malawi sharing. I'm not sure if Victoria is still on. I'm sure she is, but yeah, this is an amazing country. In fact, I was just looking at Malawi's AGOA exports this week, and about 70% of the country's exports to the United States all qualify for AGOA or actually get cleared under AGOA. That's not to say that 30% are paying import duties, but it's to say that there's a higher compliance with AGOA eligible products. and the majority of the remaining products enter the United States duty-free under normal MFN zero duty, so to speak. Yeah, anyway, great country, lots of things going on. 20 odd years ago, I took my wife there on honeymoon. So yeah, I've got a very soft spot for Malawi and Malawi's people. And Ruan, thank you very much as well. I learned quite a lot about the nuts and bolts side of trading. That was certainly very interesting, and I really I can see your knowledge and passion on that subject. So I hope I'll be able to just mop up a little bit, bring in a little bit of a different angle, in a way, a bit of an umbrella angle on AGOA, but also just towards the end in the second part, some practical advice on the theme that I was asked to present on, and that is on how do you determine the AGOA eligibility of your product. And we've created a bit of a tool to make it very easy for users to establish that. And in fact, not just establish the AGOA eligibility of your product, but also just use it almost as a bit of a market intelligence tool in terms of what would normal duties be if it wasn't shipped on under AGOA. What would your competitors be charged facing? Obviously, the US importer pays the duties, not the exporter generally, subject obviously to the Incoterm being used. Yeah, so it's just an interesting way of just using this tool that we've created and finding out essentially where's the competitive advantage of AGOA. I'm going to just share my screen, in fact my PowerPoint. Click share. Can you see my screen? Rex, can you give me a heads up, or someone?
We can.
Okay. All right. So basically, and as I mentioned just now, the mopping up, so to speak. But in terms of mopping up, I will take a bit of a broad approach on AGOA and just run through some of the legislative aspects of AGOA and kind of the programmatic aspects of AGOA, because I think those are quite important to traders, because no use being uninformed about those things, but have an expectation that you can access the US market duty-free when possibly there are changes coming or already underway to AGOA. Not that there are, but there might be some coming. And then, as I mentioned just now, just a little bit of some practical advice to help exporters, traders, those doing a bit of market research on their product, just ascertaining the AGOA eligibility of the product, but also very importantly, helping to establish the correct classification code of the product. Ruan has mentioned that a few times, the importance of classification. I'm going to build on what he said and just add a few comments on that to stress that point, and also just to explain which HS classification code needs to be used, not necessarily for your particular product, but which specific code to refer to, because it is a system that is only partially harmonized globally. So it doesn't help using, for example, South Africa's or Lesotho's or Malawi's classification code for a specific product, when the United States might be using a different one for that particular product. But we'll get to that a little bit shortly. So without much further ado, these are kind of the two core themes I'm going to address. First of all, the first part is literally the broader scheme, the broader analysis of AGOA, what are its key benefits, what are the key program aspects of AGOA, how does it link to the United States GSP? We often see this, this AGOA slash GSP. GSP stands for the Generalized System of Preferences. What is it? What is that link? Is it relevant? Is it not relevant? How is it relevant at the moment or not? So I just want to make that clear. Not much time that needs to be spent on it, but it is quite important. And one of the reasons why it is important, apart from a particular competitive advantage that AGOA provides at the moment, is that US importers are still clearing goods under GSP when they should be using the AGOA program indicator, and they are paying the price for that. So I will address that part as well shortly. And then just to round that up in terms of, what are the couple of uncertainties and future expectations around AGOA, about possible AGOA expiry and so on and so forth. And then finally, as I mentioned, just some, a few comments. I'm not a customs expert, but certainly I can address the product classification issue a little bit and product eligibility. And certainly this part is intended to be a very practical way of how do you establish the AGOA eligibility of your product, and what are the pitfalls of getting it wrong. So that'll be and there'll be kind of 2 or 3 slides and a bit of a practical demo using the AGOA.info portal. So starting with AGOA, what is AGOA? And I'm going to just get Rex back a little bit for calling me a godfather of something. AGOA is not a trade agreement. It is not a free trade area. It is a piece of United States legislation. So it's a small but important difference, in the sense that a trade agreement is something that is negotiated between parties, 2 parties or more parties, say now the African parties and the American party, but that is not the case with AGOA. AGOA is simply a piece of legislation that was enacted based on the work of a couple of persons in Congress, a couple of senators and members of the House of Representatives in the United States in the late 1990s. And it was intended to create a new trading relationship with the United States and between the United States and African countries, sub-Saharan African countries, that is not based purely on aid, but is based much more on trade and economic assistance, in the sense of providing opportunities to African exporters. So it was a very important leap, bearing in mind that many other regions of the world, European Union, for example, has always had preferential access to African countries or special programs, and the United States kind of came late to the party, so to speak, but they did a lot of catching up. And in fact, what one can safely say is that since AGOA's in action, or writing into law in 2000, so it's 23 years ago now, the United States has put a lot of effort into not just promoting and marketing AGOA, but a lot of support in helping exporters in African countries access the United States market. And it's not just trade support; it is agricultural support. It is offices being placed in, for example, the southern or the trade hubs. There've been a couple of trade and development hubs across Africa, one in Southern Africa, one in East Africa, one in West Africa. And there've been agricultural extension offices also placed with embassies and so on. So a lot of technical support being provided to Africa to basically better utilize the preferences of AGOA. So it is not just a preferential trade arrangement. And I'll try not to call it an agreement, because it is not an agreement, but it's an arrangement. It is a non-reciprocal facility on the part of the United States for eligible qualifying sub-Saharan African countries. There are currently 35 countries eligible, or rather that have the beneficiary status. There are more countries that are eligible, but some have lost eligibility as a result of, some have lost their beneficiary status. They remain eligible potentially, but they've lost their beneficiary status as a result of not complying with AGOA's eligibility criteria. And there are a couple of criteria around the rule of law and so forth. And it's not kind of going to be the purpose of this presentation. But if a country does not comply with the eligibility requirements, it can lose its beneficiary status. And a couple of countries have lost beneficiary status. The most recent one being Burkina Faso. And last year, there were another 3 countries that have lost, including Ethiopia, a major exporter to the United States of apparel in particular, and leather products, shoes and so on. But because of the war going on there in the Tigray region, the United States suspended Ethiopia's AGOA access. It is also a platform for unprecedented engagement between the United States and Africa. And that is, for example, through the annual AGOA Forum, which all of you would have heard of. So it's really a very high level, not just a high level, but a very high level platform where African trade ministers, sub-Saharan African trade ministers, and the United States House of Representatives and politicians and business and so on get together and talk basically for a couple of days, and there's a lot of engagement and cooperation that happens in that facility. But it's also a private sector forum and civil society forum, so there are different levers to this engagement, and has certainly led to much closer ties between sub-Saharan African countries and the United States. Of course, it is as I mentioned earlier on, it's a conduit for technical development and business support. For example, through the trade hubs and the work that the USAID is still doing at this stage, and through Prosper Africa now, and the Africa Trade and Investment Initiative, that is the most recent initiative that brings together a lot of these players. And then, of course, a mechanism to facilitate US-Africa investment. It's not a direct AGOA aspect, but it is part of this umbrella of AGOA-related support. So it's kind of just put a lot more focus on this engagement with African countries. And it is really a much more important thing than just providing preferential access for Africa's exporters to the United States. Brief history in terms of, it's obviously been around since, sorry, 1 second, that's not for me. No, it was signed into law in 2000, as I mentioned, and it's been extended a couple of times. Initially, it was meant to be from 2000 to 2008. Then it was extended to 2012, and then in 2012 to extend it to 2015, and then 2015 to 2025. That's the current expiry date. In the interim period, there were also a couple of technical amendments made to the legislation. This is obviously just an act of Congress. So essentially the lower house or the Senate would come up with legislation, with a bill, and they all need to agree on it. And it might, for example, one of the changes was to reclassify Botswana and Namibia as a least developed country, or a lesser developed country, as they called it, and not so much in terms of its true economic status, but for purposes of the rules of origin, the wearing apparel rules of origin, because those are more favorable for LDC countries as opposed to non-LDCs. There's only one non-LDC country in the AGOA group, and that is South Africa. So South Africa has much tighter rules of origin, much more restrictive rules of origin for textiles and apparel, not for other goods, but for textiles and apparel. So that would typically be a technical amendment. What happens after 2025 is uncertain, and I will, September 25, and I will address that a little bit later. In terms of, just very briefly, the countries in blue are those that are currently AGOA eligible. That's 35 countries at the moment. There were as many as about 43 or 44 countries at one stage, but then some countries over the years have lost their eligibility. Some have lost it and regained it, but that is the current status quo. So it is a carrot in a way, these preferences, but they are not unconditional. So countries do need to comply with certain governance and eligibility, other eligibility criteria, and they can lose their status. So essentially, and why the different colors? The light blue eligible countries, the kind of more Central African countries, are those that are just standard AGOA eligible. In other words, all AGOA eligible products qualify for preferences when exported from these and originating in these countries, except for textiles and apparel. They have not met the wearing apparel provisions, which are a separate thing, which required certain customs processes to be in place and certain visa processes to be in place to enable the tracking, for example, of fabric imports. And where a country has not put in place these mechanisms, these control mechanisms, they are not allowed to export textiles and apparel to the United States under AGOA. They can export them, but cannot obtain preferences. The darker blue countries are those that have complied with that, with those wearing apparel provisions, and they can export anything under AGOA, anything that is an AGOA eligible product. And the dark blue, in being South Africa, is differentiated purely as a result of what I mentioned just now. Their rules of origin for textiles and clothing are different to the other AGOA countries. In other words, whereas the mid-blue countries that have complied, that are so-called LDC countries, can source third country fabric. They can source their fabric from anywhere in the world and make compliant apparel, whereas South Africa needs to use locally made fabric, which in turn also has to be made from locally spun yarn. So in other words, it's a triple transformation process that is required for South African exporters versus all the others. Makes it obviously much tougher to be compliant given the state of the African textile industry, but it is what it is. One other important thing is also that textiles, and I differentiate here textiles and apparel, textiles and clothing. Textiles are eligible under AGOA from LDC countries. In other words, all the countries in light blue or mid blue. South Africa does not qualify for AGOA preferences for textiles. It only qualifies for apparel preferences, in other words, clothing of Chapter 61 and 62. That is quite an important differentiator. And it is simply just one of the extra benefits that LDC countries have under AGOA as opposed to the non-LDC country, the single country. 1 or 2 countries have been gradiated out of AGOA, for example, the Seychelles. In the past, they were also gradiated because they were they were an upper income country as a real per capita upper income country. So they lost their eligibility status. AGOA is only for developing countries. In terms of this talk about the GSP, the Generalized System of Preferences, which has been around since the 70s, I think it's since 1974, since the Trade Act of 1974, it enacted the United States Generalized System of Preferences, or more commonly known as the GSP. AGOA builds on the GSP. Okay, so it's there's a lot of overlap between the two. And what it essentially does in terms of the customs book or the tariff book of the United States, it adds a special program indicator, an SPI, what we call an SPI, the special program indicator D, to virtually all, and it's literally virtually, there's a handful that are not included for some reason, but virtually every GSP tariff line gets the AGOA D indicator. So the GSP has an A indicator, A star, A plus, and that also relates to different subcategories of the GSP, which I'll deal with in the next slide. But it attaches the D indicator to all the GSP tariff lines, bar a handful. So that is important for the importer clearing goods under AGOA preference, duty-free under AGOA preference, needs to use the D if they want to clear it under AGOA. And I think just one thing I also just want to make clear again, AGOA removes import duties. Okay, so trade that takes place under AGOA is duty-free, free of any import duty. There's no reduction in duties. That is, for example, something that happens with the Europeans. They reduce duties in some cases, they remove them in others, they have certain preferences, but AGOA removes duties completely for eligible products that are compliant with the rules of origin. In other words, they need to be originating in the exporting country, in the eligible beneficiary exporting country in order to benefit from AGOA, but there'll be no duties. What does not get removed, and I'll have that in the last point, and I'm going to jump to the last point quickly, is that AGOA does not remove quotas. Talking of Malawi, for example, early on, Malawi has a quota on tobacco exports. AGOA does not, unfortunately, remove that. And these quotas are fully utilized by AGOA. So up to that quota level, they are duty-free under AGOA. Beyond the quota level, duties apply. That is unfortunate, but it is what it is. I've heard of a case, for example, of Zambian exporters of peanut butter paste hitting that quota because peanut butter paste also has a quota. It has a fairly large quota for the world, also rather for certain countries, a fairly large quota overall. Certain countries have a large share of that quota, the NAFTA countries. Then the rest of the world has a very small quota. And that small quota for peanut butter paste gets utilized around about middle of January of each year. So literally for 2 weeks, there's duty-free access to the United States market. After that, the quota gets hit and AGOA preferences no longer apply. So unfortunately, there is a duty that becomes applicable after that. So that's a whole other can of worms, so to speak, in terms of quotas. They apply mostly to certain agricultural products. And there is, technically speaking, or theoretically speaking, also a quota on the LDC provisions for apparel. However, this quota is so high that the utilization of the quota has never in 23 years been hit, even come close to being fully utilized. I think it's gotten as far as about 60% utilization. And so it's not an effective quota. It's nothing to worry about in practice. But certain of the agricultural products do have quotas, and it is something to be concerned about or to be mindful of. There's a lot more information on US quotas on the AGOA.info website under the About AGOA drop-down menu. So have a look there. There's also a guide that's been written, or is about to be written on US quotas, but certainly a lot of information, a whole section on US quotas and where to find the utilization rates on AGOA quotas. what AGOA also does, it incorporated certain sensitive, previously considered sensitive products into the fold. So in other words, there's a bunch of products that were not previously GSP eligible that are now part of AGOA. So that's that's a couple of hundred products. What it also does is it removes CNLs. CNL stands for competitive need limits. And a CNL is effectively a mechanism whereby the United States regulates or puts a potential cap on imports of a particular product when it exceeds a certain percentage of total US imports in that category. So, for example, if one country, let's use the example of Kenya, becomes a very important supplier to the United States of macadamia nuts, which happens to be the case alongside South Africa. South Africa and Kenya together fulfill 80% or 79% of the US import market of macadamia nuts. Malawi is the third big player here. That's another 10% or something. So under the GSP, there would have been the risk of South Africa and Kenya losing their preferential status because they account for too much of a share of total US imports of macadamia nuts. Similar story with origins, for example, from South Africa. AGOA takes away these limitations. So there's no limitation based on what the GSP previously had. The CNL is no longer an issue under AGOA. It's another thing why AGOA is better than the GSP. Of course, the longer preference horizon, AGOA until 2025, it will have been 25 years by that stage. Maybe it'll get renewed beyond that. We're hoping for a renewal. Unlike the GSP, that is subject to much shorter timelines. And I think what is quite important to note here at this point, and I think I have it on the next slide, is that the GSP basically since 2000 had to be renewed 9 times, of which about 5 or 6 times it was not renewed prior to expiry. So during the time when it's not expired, US importers cannot claim a preferential status for such imports. What then generally happens through an act of Congress is that the GSP gets extended and a retrospective application of the GSP preferences is possible, and importers can claim back those import duties that they paid on those goods. But it is not a particularly comfortable situation because it creates uncertainty, it raises costs, and it has a knock-on effect on selling prices, and probably more often than not on the exporter, because the exporter is then required or expected to drop their price in order to make up for that duty that is now due, even if it is on a temporary basis. But what happened at the end of 2020 is that the GSP expired, and it has not to date been reauthorized by Congress. So that's 2.5 years, almost 2.5 years, where there has been no GSP. So US imports cannot enter under the GSP, leaving only AGOA for African exporters. So that is an important thing, and I think I have this now in this slide here. So essentially what the GSP has been doing, it has been offering preferences, and there's a large overlap between the GSP and AGOA in terms of the product coverage since the 1970s. I think it's since 1974, at the time of the United States Trade Act, and more than 100 countries, including 20, 30 or 30 to 40 African countries, are beneficiaries of the GSP. But that means not just the AGOA countries are beneficiaries, but another 70 or 80 countries, in fact, it's more, probably about 90 countries from the rest of the world. These are all competing countries that are basically able to access the United States market, or have been able to access the United States market on a fairly even footing with the AGOA beneficiary countries, because the duty is also removed under the GSP. Big overlap, obviously, there are quite a few products, for example, textiles and apparel, and about 300 other tariff lines that are not part of the GSP, but are part of AGOA. So that is certainly the big marginal benefit of AGOA. But certainly for the rest of the products, there was very similar access for all these other countries and AGOA beneficiary countries. Now, with that GSP having been expired, or not reauthorized rather, since the end of 2000, for the last 2.5 years, that is what you have. You have 70 or 80 or 90 fewer countries to compete with on an even footing as a result of AGOA and as a result of the GSP not having been reauthorized. That's obviously the big advantage of AGOA at the moment. It makes it particularly valuable, but it's also important for the importer to note, and I know we probably don't have any US importers on this call, but on this webinar, But the US importer, the clearing agent, also needs to use the AGOA special program indicator, the D when clearing the goods, not the A for GSP. The A is only for GSP, D is for AGOA. When GSP and AGOA concurrently exist and are active, it doesn't really matter which you use, provided that both products are GSP and AGOA eligible. And you get your duty for the importer gets the duty-free access when clearing it. But at the moment, and since the end of 2000, you have to use AGOA only, and you cannot use the GSP. And if one looks at the trade data, there are still millions of dollars worth of imports from AGOA eligible countries in AGOA eligible products that are being cleared under GSP. Probably because the import agent is dealing with imports from all over the world, including from South Africa, or from African countries, from AGOA beneficiary countries, and possibly doesn't know any better, or just routinely clears it under GSP because it's always worked under the GSP, or is just expecting a reauthorization of the GSP and will claim back the import duty that is having to be paid now. However, that is not, obviously doesn't make much economic sense, and just something to be mindful of. So that is really just a summary of the key differences between the GSP, which is inactive at the moment, and AGOA, which offers 6,700 plus minus tariff lines, duty-free access into the United States without any competition, if one can call it that, from other countries, unless they have a free trade area with the United States. And obviously there are a couple of countries like Australia and others that have a free trade area, and those products might be included in that free trade area. But by and large, this is a particularly special competitive advantage that AGOA beneficiary countries or exporters in AGOA beneficiary countries have at the moment. A snapshot here of essentially, you know, what's the breakdown in terms of what duties have to be paid on and how much is covered by AGOA. And there are different shades of blue, but I've kept it blue just to really differentiate between what is under AGOA, and there's anything that's blue can fall under AGOA or falls under AGOA, and what is not blue does not fall under AGOA, although it's not necessarily subject to duty. So starting with the left-hand side, the biggest quadrant, the 44%, those are products, roughly 5,500 tariff lines at the 8-digit level, HTS 8-digit level, that are duty-free, both under AGOA and under GSP, if the GSP is active. At the moment, it is only under AGOA, but it is essentially a GSP product, or these are GSP products as well, that have the special program indicator A in the tariff book, in the United States tariff book. So 44% of the roughly 11,500 tariff lines fall under AGOA and GSP. It does not matter under which program things are cleared, while both of these programs are active. At the moment, you have to use AGOA for these. Another roughly 270 products are AGOA, but do not have the GSP tariff indicator, program indicator. So that's the 2.5% quadrant, roughly 270 products, tariff lines, a couple of previously very sensitive products. This is not including textiles and clothing. This is non-textiles and non-clothing items that I've differentiated here. So roughly 270 really represent one of the key advantages of AGOA versus what other countries face. And then AGOA textiles and clothing categories are roughly another 1,400 tariff lines or 1,400 products, if one wants to call it that. These are duty-free as a result of AGOA. They are not duty-free under the GSP. So there's no competition, so to speak, to exports from AGOA eligible countries. And just bearing in mind the caveat that I mentioned early on, this does not fully apply in the same way to South African exporters, because South African exporters cannot get duty-free exports or access to the United States market for textiles. In other words, for most fabrics and yarns and those things. But all other countries, all other AGOA beneficiary countries do have full access under a special provision under Chapter 98 for textiles, and of course, for all apparel goods of Chapter 61 and 62. And that includes South African exporters as well, subject to their own rules of origin. And I think maybe at this point, because I don't have a special slide on rules of origin, it is worth mentioning what are these rules of origin, because it is one thing talking about preferential access to the United States market for thousands of goods, but it is another thing actually being able to benefit from that access, and that is always subject to the product being a product that originates in the beneficiary country. And how and when does it originate? Not if it's sent from that country. That plays a very small role if it's sent from the country. It's where is it manufactured? Where is the value being added to that product to make it an originating product? And we speak about in the economic origin rather than a geographic origin. So maybe, more in the shipping sense of the phrase, one would talk about, what's the port of export, so to speak. That might be the originating port. But for origin purposes, for AGOA purposes, in terms of claiming preference, it is important that the product originates in that AGOA beneficiary countries, subject to meeting the rules of origin. There are two types of rules of origin, or to be accurate, maybe three types of rules of origin under AGOA. The main one for all non-textiles and clothing goods requires that 35% of the working and processing and content and material needs to be originating. So as long as as 35% of that product you're sending is of local origin in a beneficiary country or in another beneficiary country under the accumulation rules. So for example, a South African exporter of motor vehicles can use leather sourced from Botswana to make the leather seats in that Mercedes-Benz. And that is part of the 35%. Because it is under the accumulation rules. It is from another AGOA beneficiary country, they can jointly meet that rule, essentially. So 35% has to be local content, that is labor cost plus material costs. And for all other goods, in other words, for textiles and clothing, being the other goods, special rules of origin apply. And there are about 12 different categories of rules of origin for apparel. And they are, and the most important one, and I don't think we need to go through all of them now, but certainly the most important one is that goods have to be made up in the beneficiary country. So for example, using Malawi as an example, the good has to be made up, cut, sewn together, assembled in Malawi to be originating in Malawi. It does not matter what the origin of the fabric is. So the fabric can be coming from China or from another country, from India, as long as the making up, the cutting, making, trimming, the making up of the good has to take place in Malawi, and that confers preferential origin status under AGOA. Very important. There are a couple of other categories, and really the only other relevant category here, apart from some which are virtually not utilized, is the category that applies to South Africa. And that is if you're not an LDC country, in other words, if you're South Africa at the moment, so only non-LDC beneficiary under AGOA, the good has to be made from locally made fabric or regionally made fabric, which in turn has to be woven from African-made yarn. So it's more stages of transformation that have to take place in AGOA beneficiary countries or in Africa in order to comply with the rules of origin. So really looking at all the blue in total, that's roughly 6,700 tariff lines that are all duty-free under AGOA and because of AGOA. And roughly 5,500 of those, of the 6,700, would potentially also qualify for, sorry, and there's more than 6,500 tariff lines in total, but would qualify under the GSP if the GSP is alive. But at the moment, it is dormant. You cannot claim GSP benefits. So AGOA benefits have not, you've not lost out from if exporting from an AGOA beneficiary country. The 39% that I have on the right-hand side are duty-free anyway. They do not need any preferences because they are duty-free. They are duty-free for all countries. That's also another almost 4,500 tariff lines that are duty-free purely because the United States has abolished import duties in those goods. So if one looks at the data and sometimes sees, say on Malawi, to use that example again, 70% of Malawi's exports fall under AGOA and are duty-free under AGOA. That's not to say that 30% are subject to duties. The majority of those, virtually all of those remaining goods are duty-free as well under the MFN, under most favored nation principles, which is basically what the United States offers all countries, virtually all countries. There are some exceptions. North Korea, Belarus, Russia, and Cuba are the four countries that are so-called column 2 countries that do not benefit from MFN, but the other countries all do. So the grand total basically takes us to 97.5% of goods that are duty-free when exported from an AGOA beneficiary country. Only 2.5% 2.5% of tariff lines are subject to any import duty when exported from these countries. They unfortunately do not qualify for AGOA, but it is really a very small percentage of the total and total possible exports. I'm just thinking in terms of, probably in the interest of time, just very briefly here, this is just a snapshot really how's AGOA been doing. Last year, 2022, $8.5 billion worth of AGOA exports, and that represented a 50% increase over 2021. Of course, looking at percentage changes at the moment or the last couple of years, it's always a bit tricky because of COVID and restrictions and so on and so forth, but it's a lot higher than even in 2019 pre-COVID. So there's been an absolute boost in AGOA eligible exports over in 2022, certainly over previous years, including pre-COVID. A lot of it is involving oil exports. Oil doesn't really need AGOA, but it is an AGOA eligible product. So Nigeria and Angola in particular are those countries, in Gabon, that are exporting quite a bit of oil. So it does inflate the numbers a little bit. But what is important to note here is half of that were non-oil exports. So those are agricultural products, apparel, nuts, and automotives, and various metals, chemicals, and so on, that are all benefiting from AGOA preferences. And since 2000, it's been 560 billion, of which 97 billion has been in non-oil exports, those that are really benefiting a much larger number of companies and parts of the population. However, notwithstanding AGOA, and this is almost just curious or interesting, or just a reflection of how much US imports have grown overall, is that in 2000, when AGOA was enacted, 1.5% of US global imports came from AGOA beneficiary countries. This is pre-AGOA, essentially, or the start of AGOA. AGOA was enacted in May of 2000. Now it is less than 1%. So 23 years later, the share has actually reduced in terms of what sub-Saharan African AGOA beneficiary countries are exporting to the United States. Totals have not necessarily decreased, but the total US imports from all sources have increased by so much that we are being almost swept along, but our share has declined in relative terms. In terms of just looking ahead, and this is before I get to the last and slightly more practical session, when is AGOA expiring? That's in September 2025. That's not that long to go. That's 2 years to go, 2.5 years to go. There is, anyway, let me leave that comment for now. What is the fallback position? So previously, certainly pre-2020, the expiry or the non-reauthorization of the GSP, one could argue that if AGOA goes, at least 5,500 of those tariff lines are still GSP eligible. In other words, they still are able to be exported to the United States from sub-Saharan African developing country or least developed country, duty-free to the United States. That was the fallback position, but it is a very shaky fallback position. As we know, at the moment, there is no GSP to fall back on, so there's nothing. So the fallback position is exactly nothing can be exported duty-free from these countries if it weren't for AGOA. So that is a little bit worrying. Another thing to consider, and that is something that is more relevant to South Africa than it is to other countries, is that the GSP has various different subcategories. So it has a category which is the general GSP scheme of these, of which 3,500 tariffs of roughly 5,500 in total are available to all developing countries, the non-LDCs included. Okay. However, another roughly 2,000 tariff lines are only reserved for LDC countries. So an exporter, for example, in South Africa would not have that fallback position, only has a potential fallback position of 3,500 tariff lines at best. And that is assuming that the GSP gets renewed and reauthorized at some point. And there's talk about, but there's been talk about it for the last 2 years. It's a difficult political situation. I'm pretty sure it will be reauthorized, but that is just the status quo. And this has been the longest period of non-authorization of the GSP in history. So it is, normally it's a couple of months. Now it's been 2.5 years or going on 2.5 years. It's a long time for businesses to be trading without any preferences unless they have AGOA. So that fallback position is something, but it is a shaky fallback position, and it's just something to take note of. South Africa, at best, 3,500 tariff lines are duty-free. Other AGOA eligible countries, if it wasn't for AGOA, at best, 5,500 tariff lines, provided that the GSP gets reauthorized. There was also a review that's been taking place of AGOA that was requested by the US Congress, the US Congress being those that, or the party that is responsible for renewing AGOA, or extending it, or changing it, or letting it lapse. They did a review of AGOA, and a one-year study. They sent United States International Trade Commission to various African countries. They've been interviewing. I've had one of those interviews with them, and a couple of parties in South Africa and 3 other countries. And what they have found is that the overall economic development impact and poverty reduction impact appears to be minimal, which is obviously a bit concerning, some red warning lights there. But for some countries and sectors, it's been substantial. So again, Malawi could be used as an example. Lesotho can be used as an example. I think it's 95% of US exports all fall under AGOA. US exports, sorry, Lesotho's exports to the United States all are AGOA eligible and claim and are basically because of AGOA. So kind of for some countries and some sectors, it is absolutely critical. For others, it would have an impact. South Africa is the largest AGOA beneficiary country. It would have a substantial impact, the largest impact, but relative to the bigger, broader scheme of things, probably not quite as much as it would have for certain other countries. But however, you know, there's talk about AGOA needs to be improved. You know, what more can be done? I'm not quite sure what more can be done because it is already a fairly beneficial program. But certainly one thing, and we're seeing that already, is a lot more effort being placed in supporting African countries in utilizing AGOA benefits. And you know, workshops like this, or you know, agricultural extension office, or training and help with compliance and you know, sanitary and phytosanitary measures and customs issues and so on. These are all issues which will probably assist with and labeling and food security and all those things will probably all be very helpful and possibly be considered. Might not be that easy to put that into legislation, but there might be a bigger budget for this kind of technical support of AGOA beneficiary countries and exporters. Now, reauthorization, it's 2.5 years ago. That is not a very long period of time. Of course, a lot of trade can still take place in that time, but there has been a push, quite a strong push this year already for a reauthorization. I believe there's a bit of work going on behind the scenes, a bit of lobbying and so on. More than a bit of lobbying, probably quite a lot of lobbying. So that is potentially good news. Whether all countries will have exactly the same benefits, that is quite uncertain. Will South Africa benefit in the same way? Also quite uncertain. But I think what is also important to consider, AGOA is not costing the United States anything. First of all, it doesn't account for much in terms of its overall imports, but and every trade, again, one needs to see this as is not just has an exporter that benefits, also an importer that benefits, and a consumer, US consumer that benefits. So there's always a win-win situation for both sides of the Atlantic, both parties. So it's really not a big cost to the United States. It's just a big benefit as well, and maybe a benefit that should somehow be expanded in certain ways. For example, you know, could special quotas be put in place that are much bigger than current quotas? That quotas are a thing of the past for AGOA beneficiary countries. One possibility or one idea. There's also obviously the political and dimension around what if the United States lets go of AGOA? What happens to these countries? What happens to other big international players that are interested in Africa? You know, we have a bit of we had a Cold War a couple of decades ago, and we have a bit of a Cold War going on again. And there are a couple of countries that are very interested in Africa, and I don't think the United States, that's my very personal view, would let this opportunity and this goodwill gone that has been created over the last 23 years. So I cannot see AGOA just falling away, or at least being renewed and replaced with something bigger and better. But there is uncertainty at the moment. So that's just kind of just some comments on that. Now, just moving in terms of just slightly more practical, and that is, first of all, one slide quickly on product classification, and then how to establish AGOA eligibility for your product. So product classification is absolutely critical. If you don't have a correct classification, you're likely to run into a lot of problems at the US border. It's also classification, the correct classification is linked to the AGOA program indicator, the special program indicator. So product being AGOA eligible needs to be a product that is on the list, so to speak, one of these roughly 7,000 tariff lines. There are various consequences of misclassification and why it is so important to classify correctly. And this is something I think freight forwarders and those involved in the logistics process are much more acutely aware of. But just mentioning a couple of, it's obviously the most obvious one is that you are overpaying on duties because you weren't able to claim for preferences. That's a very obvious one. There are penalties for non-compliance, delays. Your container might be held up by customs as a result of incorrect tariff classifications. There might be fines. You might be blacklisted. The importer might be blacklisted. The clearing agent might be blacklisted. It could be charges against, if it's deliberate misrepresentation. Obviously, failure to benefit from AGOA preferences if you get it wrong. There could be disputes that drag on, special audits. Suddenly the exporter gets audited, the clearing agency gets audited, the importer gets audited. Preferential trader status, the registered trader, the importer might lose their preferential trader status, or the clearing company. All kinds of the seizure of goods was mentioned early on, about goods being either destroyed or sent back. That's always a possibility. So yeah, it's just something very important to get right. So be absolutely clear on that. And again, what is important is when you're exporting to the United States, it's essentially you're importing into the United States. The US importers are importing from the AGOA beneficiary country. You use and you rely and you refer to the United States Harmonized Tariff Classification Code. So not the South African code or the Malawian code or the Zambian code, the US code. And up to the 6th digit, the Harmonized System nomenclature or tariff classification system, which is essentially being managed by the World Customs Organization in Brussels, and every 5 years there's a review and there are changes that happen to the HS system, is only harmonized up to the 6th digit level. But that is not enough for international trade. That's good for maybe statistics and various other labeling required, but it's not good enough for international trade. You need at least the 8th digit, and I think sometimes even the 10th digit for correctly classifying your goods. And you need to rely on the US tariff classification system, not on the African tariff classification system, because the last 2 digits are not always the same, are often different. So a South African 8-digit classification system or classification code for your product might very well be different to the United States tariff classification code. And if you have it wrong, and they type that into the system in the United States at customs, there'll be a nil return, there'll be nothing. It'll be basically a misclassification. So it's just really important to know, and I think here it's important to work with your freight forwarder, your logistics company, but also with your United States buyer, because the buyer often has experience in sourcing that particular good and will also have information on the correct HTS code that they usually use, perhaps for the same product. Just because they use it for other products is no guarantee, but certainly is providing compelling guidance that is probably the correct tariff classification to use. So very important, the US code needs to be used, not the African code, and there are differences. Another very important thing to be mindful of when you look up the correct tariff classification code is obviously each tariff classification, each product has a unique tariff classification number. So that's the easy part. However, when you are searching or reviewing or researching the correct tariff classification code for your product, and you're using a keyword or a term, and you're looking at the tariff database, and you can't find it because of that word that you're using doesn't appear, that is not because that product doesn't exist. It is because there are many products and many tariff lines which are so-called other, or certain good, not NESOI, not elsewhere specified or included. So basically, it's the mopping up within a certain subheading of goods, or a heading of goods, rather more importantly, subheading of goods, where your good might be classified under this slightly more generic tariff code, which is kind of, if you're exporting lemons, it'll be talking about citrus fruit and lemons and so on. But maybe you have a certain product that is certainly, has a certain certification. It is what was I forget the term now, when something when goods have been grown without using pesticides and so on, it's been been organically grown, that has its own tariff classification code. And it might just, as an example, and this might be an incorrect example, but I'm just using it to illustrate a point, might be under a other category or not elsewhere specified or included citrus tariff line. So just be quite mindful of that it is a bit of an art and a bit of a science to get the tariff classification code, and certainly use help from your freight forwarding, your logistics company, your shipping company, and the US importer to just double check, but don't just rely on them. Do your own homework, and it's quite easy to do your own homework, and I will show you how to do that in a few minutes. Yeah, and then another thing to be very mindful of is that the United States tariff classification, and it was mentioned early on, you get the harmonized system, the international harmonized system, tariff classification system, is based on 99 chapters or 98 chapters. And I think it's 11 sections. So 11 sections, these are divided into 99 sections. 11 sections divided into 99 chapters. And then you get your 2-digit and your 4-digit, your headings and your subheadings, and so on and so forth, all divided even further. But in the United States Harmonized Tariff Classification Code, in the HTS, there are also chapter notes. And the chapter notes are very important to consult, because sometimes there will be a product where it is really not clear where should such a product be classified under. Is it even a chapter 72 versus a chapter 80 something product? Because maybe it is cutlery made of a certain metal. Does it fall under that metal, or does it fall under certain household goods? Just to use again an illustrative example. And there you need to look at the notes of each chapter. So if you think it is something that falls under copper products, then you look under the copper chapter, which might be chapter 71 or 72. I don't know exactly which one, but it's early 70s. You look up the notes preceding that chapter. In that chapter, you download that chapter, which has obviously all the tariff lines, but also has notes. And you look at the notes if there's more guidance on your particular product in the notes, because the notes are very important. And there's a bit of devil in the detail, but it's absolutely essential that you consult the notes to each chapter if you are not quite sure which classification code to use. So these are the two important things. Or the takeaways maybe is consult the notes, it's starting in reverse order now. Consult the notes of your chapter, but also be mindful that if you're looking for a keyword to try and establish your tariff line, that keyword might not be part of the official wording of that tariff line. And it might even be a product that is either spelled differently, or is just grouped in a different way, or it is included in a tariff line that is a so-called other, or NESOI, not elsewhere specified or included. So it'll have a descriptor, but it'll be all those citrus products, NESOI, not elsewhere specified or included. Be mindful of those two things. In terms of making it easy to obtain information, the first one is, before we get to a tool, we've created a guide recently, and you can get it on the go.info website. I've taken a little screenshot there of the top little bit of the go.info website. It's under go.info. Just type in a go into Google. You've all been on a go.info, I'm sure. But type in a go.info, go to the website, and under the Exporter Toolkit menu, the top line, a Go Guides and Infographics. And there's a whole section of around about 25 or 27 infographic or guides like this here. They are 2-page guides. They're not meant to be Bibles on anything. They're not meant to be requiring lots of reading. They are meant to be condensed information to give you a good crash course in a particular subject, or the Go performance of your particular country. So there are quite a few national guides as well. So this particular one is on classification code trade and explains how to look. It has a couple of QR codes, so you can scan that with your phone. You literally just hold your phone against the code, it'll come up with a link, and you can navigate to that link for external resources. But it just explains the importance of HS classification, which HS classification to use, where to find it, and there's also a little bit of information on paperwork and so on. Really, it's a quick and easy read, but it condenses quite a bit of information into 2 pages, a double-sided document. And there are quite a few others, for example, on barcoding, There's a new guide on barcodes. There's another guide on trade remedies, US trade remedies, and so on and so forth. So there are quite a few guides, basic exporter toolkit or basic exporter checklist, quite a few guides, wearing apparel, rules of origin, general rules of origin, eligibility requirements, all guides that are available for download and it's all free. In terms of just very practical, and I think these are my last 1 or 2 slides. Establishing the GO eligibility of your product. And this is just a very simple and easy tool. And there's always the United States official Department of Commerce HTS section where you can do all your research as well. It can get a little bit complicated on the US side, but it's entirely possible to use that as well. We've just tried to make it even easier for you, and at least to make that, do that first research and do a bit of market research, because there's a bit of nice functionality that's integrated. And in fact, other functionality that we are considering at the moment, and that is, for example, if you've done your research or you've run your query and you've gotten your product confirmed, this is what your product is, there'll be soon, I don't want to put a date on it, a functionality where you can print it. So you can download and print it. So it'll be a nice PDF document, which is not a certificate, not an official guarantee, because the information is what you've given in, basically. But basically, your results query with the information, the tariff code, the GSP status, the GO status, the full description of the code, the normal US import duties if you do not comply with the rules of origin, and so on and so forth. So it'll give you a nice little printout, and you can save that, which I think will be quite useful. So again, if you navigate to the go.info website, top right is a little screen grab of the top part of the website. It's a very large portal, and that is really just the top 20% of the website on the homepage, on the landing page. Obviously, there are lots of sections underneath this, but basically, this tool is new, and all this interface is new on the front page to make it even easier for you to establish the correct tariff classification of your product, but also the GO status of your product and the GSP status and the US import duty on that particular product if you don't meet the paperwork or the rules of origin requirements. And you can search by name, the top field. So basically the part in the middle of the screen of the slide is a snapshot of that one block on the front page. That's very prominent right at the top of the page, almost at the top of the page. And it's got 2 input fields. So you can run a query based on a keyword or a phrase or a sentence. Don't make the sentence too long, because if it doesn't match anything that is in the official US tariff classification book, then you're not going to get a hit. So rather use individual words or 2 words possibly, but ideally start with 1 word that best describes your product. So for example, if it is oranges, use orange, as opposed to a whole long sentence on something, because orange is likely to give you lots of hits. Or you can, if you already know part of your HTS code, your product classification code, or you know your national classification code, you could try that. This requires the second field, so you can run a query either on a keyword or on a code, your tariff classification code. It does not need to be the full US code. It can be 4 digits, for example. And here the benefit is, if you know what the tariff classification code of your product is in your jurisdiction, in your country, which might differ from the US code at the 8-digit level, by all means, use the first 6 digits of that, because they will overlap. They will be the same. Use the first 6 digits of that, plug it into that second field, and press start your search. And it'll take you to a results screen. And I'll get to that results screen just now. So if you've got 2 options, you can search by keyword of your product that someone describes your product, keyword or keywords, or part of a sentence, or by a code, the full code or part code. And the site is set up in such a way you cannot put letters into the second field. It's got to be numbers, no spaces. It forces you to use automatically reduces the code to take away dots and spaces, and it limits the number. And yeah, so not much can go wrong. It just helps you a little bit in getting that input field correct. On the right hand side, that is simply a link to another section of the site, and that is view or download the 2022 HTS by chapter. In fact, that has just literally a couple of days ago changed to the 2023. So the latest chapters are all on there now. The latest rendition is, in fact, it's version 4 of 2023 is already on the site, and you can literally download every single chapter of the US classification code, which when you download that chapter has the notes, has all the products, and has the tariff codes and the special program indicators in there as well. So that kind of is also a nice reference material. I'll go to the next. So just using that example, if you have put in here, for example, cocoa in as a keyword in the top, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but in the top field here, if you put in cocoa and you press start your search, it'll take you to a results screen, which looks something like this. In fact, that results screen has quite a bit more information at the top. I've cut that off, I've cropped that off. And that, for example, explains what's the difference between the GSP status A+, A, and A star, for example. And a couple of other things. It provides an explanation on the D special program indicator for Go, and so on and so forth. I've just blended it out here now for purposes of the exercise. But the critical information is at the top of that page. So this is the results screen you get after you've inputted your query on the homepage, on the front page of ago.info. And this is just running a query on a cocoa. And you can see all of these and more, that's just part of the screen, are hits on the US tariff classification code containing the word cocoa. So it might be yogurt, which has cocoa in, fruit cocoa in, fruit and or cocoa. It has chewing gum, which has cocoa in, nuts with cocoa or cocoa coated nuts, sugar confectionery, and as you go down, all kinds of other, cocoa paste and so on and so forth. The first code is the US tarification code, the HTS, 8 digits in the first column. So that is quite important. That is what you will need for the paperwork, or certainly the US importer will need that for the paperwork. Second column is the description, the full description. That is not needed per se, but that might provide you some guidance when you fill in the details, the description on your form. Ruan can maybe comment on that later on, but that provides some kind of information on the wording, the official wording. So it is probably helpful. It obviously needs to be correct, but it is probably helpful to have this guide, the official language for that tariff classification code. The next column, the Go status column, you have different, and I will go to a live demo just now, and this is just one part of it here. You have D ago. Used to be just D. We've done some changes recently, in the last couple of months now, to make it even clearer and less ambiguous than before. So rather than just being a D, where you needed to know what does D mean, it now says D-ago. Obviously, in the paperwork, you don't put in D-ago, you would put in just the D. But it provides you as the user an explainer that this is indeed an ago eligible product. So it needs to have D-ago. If it is an empty field, like some down the line here, it does not qualify for ago. The second field is GSP, and all, and I will get to that just now, why there's all, because we are differentiating between the general GSP, the A+, the A star, and just the A. The A for all countries, A star for some countries, LDCs, and A+ for countries where there are certain countries that have been excluded from GSP beneficiary status. But this is basically a global search, ago yes or no, and just gives you, a GSP yes or no, and gives you that information as well. So you can see for those 3 products a little bit further down the line, or in fact the third one even on the line, not ago, that yogurt, not ago, not GSP. So it says non-GSP. Before it was just free, an empty field. Now it says non-GSP, so it does not qualify for GSP. And the duty. And a bit further down the line, you see as well, 40 cents per kilogram plus 10.4% ad valorem duty. So basically, those are the duties that you face if you're exporting a non-AGOA, non-GSP product to the United States. There are no preferences for those products. There might also be other categories where it says not AGOA, not GSP, but MFN tariff is 0. And in fact, that's the majority of products are MFN 0. If they are not AGOA eligible and not GSP eligible, in fact, if they are AGOA eligible, they are almost always also GSP eligible. And in all likelihood, there'll be a duty. But if they're not AGOA eligible, if they're not AGOA eligible and not GSP eligible, there's a good chance that there's no duty. Some will have a duty, but many do not have a duty because it's MFN 0. Don't forget to press go, top right corner, to run the query. And then if you run the second query, so there's no confusion in the system, there's a button here, top left, that says clear filters, and it just removes basically your fields that you've put in, your query results, and basically gives you a blank screen again, or rather the full list. What I want to just do is give you a brief practical demo for a couple of minutes, because what it is also useful for doing this, having this tool here, is you can run partial queries, and I make the comment here, conditional searches. And why is that useful? You can, for example, do a search on products, for example, oranges, an orange. You say now you want to export orange marmalade, and you want to see all just orange products, and you want to see which are the products that are AGOA eligible, which are the AGOA eligible products but not GSP eligible. And why is that useful when the GSP is around? At the moment, it is useful anyway, but it is useful when the GSP are around. Those are the products where your competitor countries and other countries do not get any benefits when exporting to the United States. So it's only AGOA eligible countries that get their benefit because it's AGOA eligible. And you can run a query. It needs to be AGOA eligible, so it needs to have the keyword orange, be AGOA eligible, but not GSP eligible. Or you can have it GSP eligible and AGOA eligible and be an orange, or something to do with the word orange in. You can run that query as well. So that list will be longer. And you can hone it down and do a bit of market research on what are your competitors having to pay when exporting to the United States. And I'm going to just, well, I'm already sharing my screen, but I'm going to just quickly go onto my screen. Is my screen still being seen? The go.info website. Can someone confirm? Rex, can you confirm?
It's just your slide is being shown.
Okay, then I need to. Okay, then I just need to change something on the new share. Okay, sorry, just a sec. Okay, is this working better?
Yeah, it's working now.
Okay, so basically that's just the go.info website, and I'm not going to really spend much time. In fact, let me just give. No, I'll get to that just now. This is the go.info website. It's obviously got lots of news and lots of data and lots of all kinds of things. Quite a focus on the US-Kenya negotiations at the moment, and so on and so forth. There's tons of information, 15,000 or 20,000 articles, about 150 data sets, etc., etc. Lots of guides, lots of toolkit resources, lots of downloads. I mean, I'm just clicking on the download section. Each of these sections has dozens of documents in. There's literally anything around AGOA, a lot of market studies, all available for free download, and it's all very easily accessible. But just focusing on the AGOA eligibility, or product eligibility, which kind of what I'm here for today, and just to give you a brief practical review of that, or view of that. So it's housed under the about AGOA.info, so about AGOA section, AGOA products database. But basically, you don't even need to navigate to that. You can literally on the front page, this section that I've just been dealing with, you can just use this here as well, and just input straight from there, and it'll return the full section on tariff classification and AGOA eligibility. But let me just navigate to it manually and go to product database full, and that should take me there now. So you can these kind of concertina in and out, a bit of extra information on guide to the classification codes. What does a D, A plus, A star refer to, and so on and so forth. Things to know about the HTS classification and introduction. Just a couple of extra kind of bits of information. But we've recently just put this onto a concertina thing, so it doesn't become too noisy and to clog up the website. And rather, this is the tool, so to speak. And this is the entire tariff database. You can see at the bottom here, 154 pages of line items, roughly 11,500 tariff lines. They can all be searched via this tool. And just, as I mentioned just now, the correct HTS code is here, the one that the United States database uses, or the tariff classification that the schedule of the United States uses. This is what's relevant, not your national schedule, your HS8 code. That's not relevant. It's the United States code that needs to be used. It's all here. The description, and as I mentioned just now, the column where you can restrict your query, or that gives you, or limit your query to certain to certain subfields or secondary indicators. Under AGOA status, all is all apparel, textiles, and just general AGOA. So AGOA with a D, as a special program indicator, is all AGOA eligible countries. And then because there are special provisions for textiles and clothing, these have a special indicator here that also needs to be used when importing into the United States. So you can also review these here separately. GSP status, again, all is a default, and you can do a search only for A star, A plus, and A star, A plus, and so on are all explained a little bit under the basic guide here. A is for all GSP countries, A plus, and A star. As I mentioned earlier on, or many times now, it is a little bit moot at the moment because the GSP is currently not reauthorized, but I do expect it to be reauthorized at some point sooner rather than later, and this all becomes relevant again. So you've got that AGOA status that GSP status that you can search for, and you can even do a search for only free items if you wanted to. But let's just, for example, orange. Yeah, I did that early on. So I want to look up oranges or certain orange product. I've just pressed go so here, and these are the results. These are all 27 line items that feature the word orange in. So it already has everything with an orange. AGOA or not AGOA. The first one, fresh oranges, major export category from South Africa, is AGOA. It's not GSP. Very important. Why are we exporting so much? Because we are certainly being helped by not having to pay 2 US cents per kilogram, 1.9 US cents per kilogram on these exports. It is not AGOA eligible, GSP eligible, but it is AGOA eligible. This next one is free, peel of orange or citrus. It's free. It's not a GSP product either, and it's free under MFN 0. So there's no preference in this tariff category. The second one, first one, yes, second one, not. But basically, essentially what I'm trying to point out here, this general query that I've run, just on the word orange, on the keyword orange, and press go, as I'll do again now, is literally, and it takes literally a second or two to give you a result, gives all hits of the United States tariff classification code that you will need for AGOA exports containing the word orange, if you do not know the correct tariff classification code that you have. And here on the left-hand side, you can see which one best suits your product, which is relevant to your product. If I want to confine this search further and say, I only want to see AGOA products and all GSP. So I'm running a query, still on orange, AGOA, yes, it must be an AGOA product. So I don't want to see the second one, this peel of orange. It's not an AGOA product. It will not come up in my review, in my return. So I've done okay. And there's a shorter list now, not 27 anymore, 26 only. Okay, because all GSP are included. And then I can also say not GSP. So it must be AGOA. So I want to get that benefit under AGOA, but I want to have a product that is not GSP eligible. I don't want to have competitors. At the moment, we don't have competitors under preference because of the GSP expiry. But normally there would be 120 or 190 countries competing with us potentially because of GSP. So I'm running a query, orange, keyword, AGOA status. Yes, I want it to be AGOA, but I don't want it to be a GSP eligible product. In other words, non-GSP. And I press go again. So now I'm down to 8 tariff lines. These 8 are where some of the real benefit of AGOA lies. Previously, obviously GSP as well, a benefit. And at the moment, GSP, if something is GSP eligible, it's moot because of the expiry of the GSP. But this is where the real benefit of AGOA lies. These are orange products with the keyword orange in that are AGOA eligible and that are not GSP eligible. So any exporter previously under the GSP cannot get any benefits because it's not GSP eligible These are the duties. The last column shows the duty into the United States. Orange juice, 7.85 cents per liter. That's quite a bit in local currency, in African currency. And that's just an extra import duty that doesn't even cover anything else except it is a tax. I can also do a query on, let's quickly look up, if I'm a South African exporter. That means I look at the tariff classification codes. I want to see what GSP products, because South Africa is also a GSP beneficiary, have the A as well. So I will only confine it to A and run another query. That leaves me with only one product. So when a AGOA goes, or AGOA is gone for some reason, and we have the GSP, only one tariff line still allows a South African exporter to benefit and have preferential access to the United States market. And that is this particular one. And this is lead. It's not even a fruit. So it's a metal, but it's got the word orange in. So it's just an example how technically I, as an exporter at the moment, can do a bit of future planning. What is AGOA eligible? What do my competitor countries not get because I'm getting it under AGOA? And what is the consequence if AGOA goes? I run a query. What is AGOA? And what is only general GSP and not LDC GSP, being from a non-LDC country now, for example. Or I can run the query similarly on only LDC countries, an A+. And I'm doing that now. Press go. And I get 10 hits on this. These are all AGOA eligible. If AGOA goes, all of these 10 are still GSP eligible. So if your product is one of these here, using the keyword AGOA, orange now, you will not lose out provided that the GSP has been extended. Play around it. I've just tried to use some basic permutations. I can now also clear the filter again. I've pressed the clear button again, and it says here, filter's cleared, and I get the full database again. And I could spend all day going through 11,500 tariff lines, or I can run a query for a particular tariff line. And let me look at leather uppers, for example, for shoes. 1050. I know the tariff classification code. So I'm putting the full tariff classification code in here. Press go. What does it give me? It gives me that line. Formed uppers are footwear of materials other than leather. Sorry, okay, not leather. Yes, it is AGOA eligible. No, it is not GSP eligible. The duty is 26.2% if I don't claim my AGOA preferences. So that is my margin of my marginal benefit, my preference margin as a result of having AGOA eligible status. Very important. If AGOA goes, this is what I'm paying, 26.2%. So it is very consequential if there isn't AGOA for this particular tariff category or this product line. I think yeah, that kind of wraps up what I wanted to say, and I hope this part about the more practical tool makes sense and is helpful. But do please play around with it. It is quite powerful in the sense of running these partial queries either based on the keyword or based on partial tariff classification code. So for example, I can just put in 6406 now, 6406, and do another query, and I'll probably get far more products. You can see all of these fall under 6406. These are all uppers for footwear. And I can see which ones are AGOA eligible. The majority are. Most are not GSP eligible. So my competitor countries in other continents do not benefit at all. And this is the MFN tariff that they face. Some are free. I can also just say, which are free. Press go again. And I get this here. These are those categories that are duty-free anyway, irrespective of AGOA. I need no certificate, no nothing. Doesn't need to be originating in my country, or doesn't need to fully comply with the rules of origin, because there's no import duty on these particular uppers in these tariff lines. Again, play around with the drop-down menus. You can run partial queries based on keyword or HTS code or both, and see where it leads you. It is potentially quite powerful But otherwise, it is, if nothing else, it is powerful for helping you establish the correct tariff classification code and description and a go status and tariff if you don't comply with the rules of origin of your export product. And on the front page, if I just click on the logo again, and I want to look at the full schedule, you can click on here. And if you want to find it, and this is the download schedule, if you want to find it manually, go to About and click on United States tariff schedule by chapter. And I've just clicked on that. And every single tariff chapter of the United States, and this is the latest version, the 4th version of 2023, can be downloaded here. So for oranges, I can, that is, it was under chapter 8, for example, say now I'm an exporter of oranges. I click on chapter 8, it will download, bottom left corner, and I'll say open when finished. It should be opening now. And this is what the chapter looks like. You can see all the details in here as well, all the countries which have preferences in the United States. But most importantly, on the first page, it has the additional US notes for that chapter. Look at that, at those notes. There's a lot of devil in the details. Okay, let me just go back to my PowerPoint. And I think that concludes my part. Rex, I've ended where I was meant to end, but started early.
Great.
But thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Eckhard. Yeah, that was pretty detailed and informative, and given us some good insight. I don't think we have any questions here. There was someone asking about how to find out what their HS code is. Does your platform, your website, have something on that?
Yeah, I mean, this. I hope I'm not completely missing the point. So how to find out the HS code? So basically, maybe I should just answer that. The United States uses the word HTS code, not HS code. It's a harmonized tariff schedule as opposed to the HS code. The HS is the internationally harmonized HS system, the nomenclature, the basic Bible for the tariff classification codes that are used globally by all countries. Virtually every country uses them. But they're only harmonized up to the 6th digit. That is the HS code. First 6 digits are the HS code. Anything beyond that is national prerogative, and countries may make amendments, may put in different descriptions, different codes, whatever. But that is what's used for international trade, the 8-digit code. So it is quite important to look at the national. So the HS code, the internationally harmonized code, up to the 6th digit, can also be looked up via this tool. So you can use it. You can use it as guidance for exporting to other countries. But just be aware that the full code that this tool gives you is the United States HTS, is not the global HS code. And the HS code forms part of the HTS, but only this first 6 digits. The first 6 digits are the HTS code. Beyond that, it becomes the HTS code, the harmonized tariff schedule code of the United States.
Brilliant. So that's
yes.
That system of yours can actually help them find their HS code if they follow that method.
The first 6 digits are the HS code, basically.
Great. Okay, well, brilliant. Well, thanks very much for with that information, Eckhard. As advised in the beginning of this presentation, we are working with Eckhard and his team on support and eligibility. So if you are still unsure of stuff and not able to find information that you need on our go.info, please give us a shout. Same goes for logistics. Please don't hesitate to give us a call about that, and we can find the right information from Ruan and his team on that. And yeah, stay tuned. We've got another 3 of these sessions coming up, 1 per month. So the next one will be at the beginning of June. And yeah, it'll be a little bit of other information on how to get your product into the market. So please make sure to go onto go.info, play around with the site. There's lots of things, and as Eckhard mentioned, as exporter toolkits and eligibility systems where you can find out about your products. So yeah, get on there, have a look at it, and if you're still unsure, give us a shout. Well, thank you everyone for today. Signing off now and speaking to a lot of you over the next few weeks.
Thank you. Thanks very much for your indulgence.